Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of What If Naruto was a member of the House of Gremory in high school DxD. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing content, and also go and support the author, link in description. 10,000 yen for the knife. You can't be serious. The pawn shop owner looked into the blonde's eyes and glared. Do I look like I'm kidding? I don't know. I walked into your store and you said, "Welcome good sir. How can I help you?" And even when you said that, you still looked like you were going to take the first chance you could to shoot me in the face. Naruto said as he matched the older man's glare. The shop owner sighed. Look kid, I've told you already. He picked up a large knife with a yellow guard and showed it to Naruto. This knife is 10,000 yen and I'm not changing the ticket price. If you can't afford this, then look at the other knives I've got. And I already told you. Naruto held up some money. This is the most I can spend without screwing myself over until I get paid. I would try to get some more to spend, but I'm usually one bad purchase away from living in the alley. Then maybe you can try buying one of the cheaper knives. I will if you can scrap off just a little from the tag. Okay kid. The owner sighed exhaustedly as he shook his head. Why do you even need a knife anyway? You're like what, 15 years old? 18. Naruto replied pointedly, a little offended that the man would think he looked like a kid. He was even a little taller than the owner, for Pete's sake. He was starting to shave. Okay, so why does an 18-year-old brat want a knife to begin with? Because. Naruto looked at the man. Over the last few days I've been getting into some, rather unavoidable situations. Naruto had a bit of a scowl on his face, and honestly, I'm pretty sure a knife can help me get on top of them. Plus, I don't know how to use a gun, and I'm pretty sure swords are banned in this country. The shop owner pulled over a simple knife with no guard and a black grip. This is the cheapest knife I've got while still being sturdy enough to use. And it's 5,000 yen. But, in the interest of getting you out of my store at 8:30 in the goddamn morning, I'll cut it down to 4,000 yen. How's that? Naruto looked at the simple knife for a moment before asking again, no lower. No lower. Deal. Naruto shook the owner's hand before handing him the bulk of his cash and taking the knife along with a small sheath. The man started counting through his cash as the blonde student placed the knife and its sheath together in his bag. He warned him, now make sure you don't poke anyone's eye out with that thing. And never hold the sharp end towards you. And I know how to use a knife, damn it. I've been practicing with them since I was a kid. The man looked at him in surprise before he shook his head. Now that's just worrying. Naruto walked out of the pawn shop and made his way to the ramen shop for work. After spending his entire day off resting in bed and trying to fix up what was left of his right shoulder, Naruto was feeling a little cheated. But he was at least going to enjoy the peace and quiet at his job. Of course he was going to have to pay for another apron again. When he came back the next morning to the tree to pick up his apron, the damn thing was gone. Who the fuck steals a ramen apron hanging from a tree in the middle of a park? He turned the corner and saw the ramen shop he was employed at as the front door slid open. His boss, Miyamoto, an older middle-aged man, walked out laughing and started raising the flag to signal they were open for business. Naruto waved. Hey Gramps, what you laughing at? Finally starting to go senile. The ramen owner looked at his sole employee and smiled. Hey, Naruto Mboy, about time you got here. We were just talking about you. Naruto chuckled. Yeah, he froze for a moment before he looked at his boss waringly. Wait. What do you mean, we? The door opened again and a second figure walked out behind Miyamoto. A curvier, girlier, school uniform wearing, school bag carrying, long crimson-haired figure to be exact. Rias poked her head out from behind the door with a smile and waved, Yuhu tilde. We've been waiting. Naruto instantly turned to stone and broke apart as his second-to-last sanctuary was taken from him. He pointed at her like he had seen a ghost. Why are you? I had a little extra time after I finished up some business and Issei told me about this lovely little ramen shop he went to the other day. Rias kept playing the innocent girl and blushed embers singly. I should have realized that a restaurant wouldn't be open at such an early time, but I couldn't stop myself from coming. She smiled up at the shop owner, and when Miyamoto-san saw me standing outside, he invited me in for some tea. Naruto felt a vein throb in his head. This woman had some serious guts to be playing the ditzy damsel so well in front of him. Oh. And fuckface was dead when he got his hands on him. Miyamoto scratched his head and laughed. Well, when a pretty lady such as this actually comes to my crummy little shop, I can't just say no. I mean, I think I've only seen hair as beautiful as this once before in my whole life. He then looked at Naruto with pride in his eyes, and congratulations Naruto. Rias-san tells me you joined her club at school. That's great. I didn't even know you could make friends. Naruto glared. I didn't sign the papers just yet. Rias interrupted him, but he's already been accepted by everyone in the club and we just can't wait to have him in. Rias then started acting like she was sad, but he just hasn't even bothered to show up to class anymore for the last few days. I was so worried that I came to check on him myself. Shame on you Naruto. Making such a lovely lady like this worry. He looked towards Rias and tried to console her. I'm terribly sorry for his behavior, but it is partially my fault as well. You see, he told me that he didn't need to concern himself with an education and threw himself into working here at the shop. But if I had known it was causing this much strife I would have told him to go more often. It's all right. It's almost time for Golden Week anyway. Rias smiled. He should just start making up for it now by coming to school today. Naruto looked at her with a slack jaw and shook his head. He argued, hey, it's my choice. And I decided to get some work in today. But look. Rias pointed at the school bag he carried his wallet, supplies, and a recently purchased knife in. He looked up at Miyamoto. I think that's all he needs to go to school, don't you think? Why yes. I totally agree. Naruto sneered before he took a calming breath and walked up to his boss. He looked the man in the eyes. Gramps, listen. I hate school. The subjects are boring. The days are long. I don't learn anything because I couldn't keep my focus on a can of beans long enough to save my life. It's just always been a rather agonizing experience for me. He grabbed the man's shoulder. Wouldn't you rather have me work here so we can get some quick cash and serve up some good ramen? Huh? What did you say? Miyamoto smiled and grasped Naruto's shoulder. Naruto. I hated school too. Stop bitching and get over it. Miyamoto walked into the ramen shop and closed it behind him as he left the frozen blonde outside. Rias giggled a little at his complete motionless form before she watched him sigh. He looked back at her with a dry glare. You are enjoying this way too much. Hee. Rias said with a giggle before she spun on her feet and started walking towards the direction of their school. Well, come on. No use in wasting our time anymore. Naruto grumbled before he started walking behind the cheerful devil. He looked at her strangely. You know, I'm sure classes have already started. I'm fine with being tardy but what about you? Oh it's just one day. Rias reassured as she kept walking through the streets. I might get scolded by an old friend of mine but that's a chance I'm willing to take. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and decided he wasn't going to bother talking her out of it. He had only known her for a little over a week and she had already cemented herself as one of the most stubborn women he had ever met. He thought for a moment before he looked at her back. Hey, what do I call you? She looked back at him. What do you mean? Well everyone in your club likes to call you Bucho. And I don't really know what I should call you either. Like Bucho, or Rias Gremory, or Gremory-san or Rias. You can just call me Rias. The beautiful crimson-haired woman smiled back at him. If you let me call you Naruto then I feel it would only be fair if that goes both ways. The blonde looked at her smile at him and felt it would only be a step backwards if he refused. He nodded. All right. Rias. Let's go to school. Devil. Hello everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you. The blonde girl nervously said as she stood at the front of the class. She bowed her head. My name is Asia Argento and I'll be transferring into your class today. I hope you all can watch over me while I'm here. The moment the new transfer student finished her introduction, everyone in class jumped out of their seats and roared like animals. It wasn't every day they got a super adorable little blonde foreigner transferred into their class. As everyone flocked around her, Asia was panicking and didn't know what to do. She was not used to having everyone pay attention to her. One bald student raised his head as the light reflected off his scalp. His eyes narrowed in a serious manner. A flag has risen on our pathetic little class. Among all this coal, a shining diamond has finally appeared. His friend, a young man with glasses, adjusted his spectacles as they started to shine. He shared the serious tone, B78W55H 81 centimeters. Long flowing blonde. Small but sturdy frame. Nervous but overall kind demeanor. Yes. The two perverts jumped out of their seats and posed in unison as they screamed, "The beautiful transfer student event has finally arrived, X2. Issei watched with his hand under his chin as everyone flocked around his friend. He had a fond smile on his face as he watched Asia fumble with her words and try to answer all of their questions as fast as she could. She may have looked embarrassed and flushed, but she must have been so happy that she could talk to so many new people and make friends. He's got that look on his face again. Matsuda whispered to his friend as they stared at Issei. Yep. He's already getting perverted thoughts about what he wants to do with her. Motohama said as he adjusted his glasses. They then both gave him a thumbs up. That's our Issei. Issei was brought out of his thoughts as he saw his friends surround him. What? No. I was. They're already raring to go. Freaks. One female student said as she looked at the pervert trio with scorn in her voice. They can't try to control it for a single day, can they? You need to stay away from those guys, Argento-san. One of the girls said to the new blonde as a warning. She looked back at them like they were vile. You don't want to catch any, Argento-san. But the whole class saw that Asia had disappeared from their little wall of protection from the lustful group as she happily walked over to them. She didn't notice Motohama and Matsuda's complete look of disbelief before she stopped and smiled. I tried my hardest and I was able to speak in front of everyone. Do you think I did well? Issei smiled reassuringly and nodded his head. Yeah. You were fantastic, Asia. Asia beamed a great big smile and jumped in happiness. Oh, thank you, Issei-san. EHHHHHHHHHHH. The class yelled in disbelief. She's talking to Hyodo. Why the hell is Argento-san associating with that perv? Motohama and Matsuda slammed their hands on the desk as they glared at Issei. Issei. What the hell? How does a smokin' hot blonde transfer student know your name? You hidden something from us, you bastard. Don't even try to lie because I'll know. Issei leaned back as he was cautious of their uneasy stares before he answered, well. Asia's my friend. WHAAAAAATTTTTT. The entire class yelled in even greater disbelief. She can't be your friend. Girls aren't friends with us. Especially you, the most depraved and horniest of the bunch. Issei glared and yelled at his friends. Hey, I can have friends too, you bastards. That's right. Asia walked forward and stood by Issei's desk while placing a hand to her chest. Issei-san is my dearest and closest friend. Honest. Issei felt touched by her honest feelings about their friendship as everyone stared at them in utter shock. One girl stuttered, but that's impossible, isn't it? Why would you think that? Because he's a pervert. That doesn't mean that Issei-san isn't a good person. Asia said with a red face as she defended her new friend. He's kind, and he's always watching out for me. He wants me to make as many friends as possible, and he was nice enough to let me live in his house. Everyone in class was gobsmacked by that declaration before they mechanically turned their heads to look at the brown-haired pervert. Issei sighed and shook his head. Damn. He thought Asia was adorable and was happy to help her in any way, but she was a bit of an airhead when it came down to it. Devil. Naruto had a glum look on his face as he eyed the clock's slow tick away to their lunch break. His eyes wandered and he saw most of the students in his class doing the same thing as him as they just daydreamed until it was time to eat. The teacher finally dismissed the class for an hour and everyone started getting out of their seats to get some food. Some of them glanced in his direction but they didn't give him too much time as they had other things to do. Naruto reached into his bag and pulled out his wallet to go buy some bread from the shop. It's quite a treat to see your miserable expression here at school with the rest of us. Naruto looked up to see Akino standing by his desk with her trademark smile. The students around them started to whisper when one of the two great Oni-samas started talking to the blonde as Akino tilted her head. I'm actually amazed she was able to force you to come here. Naruto looked at the Pleasant woman with a flat state before he sighed. Rias ordered you to keep an eye on me so I didn't sneak out, didn't she? Not so much an order as I volunteered to watch over you. Akino then held her hand to her cheek and smiled. I mean we share most of our classes together, so it would make sense that I would be given the task of making sure you don't try to run away. Plus I find it kind of funny to see you grumble and meander your way through the class period. He looked up at her as she smiled and deadpanned. So this sadism stuff, is that why you felt it was necessary to keep beating me to a pulp last year when I accidentally picked up your bra? No. That was just because I was embarrassed and didn't know how to act. That was the first time a boy had ever seen my underwear. I was blushing. From the hot and heavy feeling in your loins, no doubt. Naruto responded, not believing her words as Akino sent a menacing aura at him. He started packing up his bag to find a peaceful place to eat, now, if there are no other interruptions. As Naruto packed up his bag, he saw another girl from their class approach his desk. He looked up to see a young woman with a tidy mop of black hair and a few small bangs framing her face along with a pair of glasses. She had a slim, alluring figure as she stood in front of his desk quietly. Naruto looked up at the young woman as her piercing purple eyes looked back into his cerulean ones. She nodded her head with a small smile on her face. Hello, Naruto Uzumaki-kun. It's good to see you attending class a little more frequently nowadays. She placed a hand on her modest chest. Do you know who I am? Naruto thought for a moment. You're Sauna Shitori, right? The student council president. I think. He shrugged his shoulders and said in an apologetic tone, sorry, I'm not very good at remembering people I'm not familiar with. That's quite all right. Even ignoring the fact you do not come to school very often, I have never properly introduced myself to you. She said before she gave a small bow which Naruto instinctively returned to her. Everyone in class watched as the blonde delinquent not only socialized with Akino Himehime but with Sauna Shitori as well. She gave a small smile, and I thought that since the change in circumstance, I should remedy that situation. Naruto looked at her in confusion. What change in circumstance? Well, due to the fact that we are now in the same field of business. And you are working with an old friend of mine. Naruto knew she was using specific terminology so that she didn't raise too many questions by the people eavesdropping around them. He thought for a moment about what she was saying before his eyes widened and he looked at Akino smile at him. He looked back at Sauna who had a similar smile before he sighed exhaustedly. Oh, you're not, are you? I am. Damn it. Hey, Akino. Do you want to have lunch together? Everyone looked at the classroom door as the number one most popular girl in Kuo Academy, Rias Gremory, came walking into class with her bag. The whole class was in shock as the beautiful maiden walked over to them before noticing the continued appearance of the blonde student. She smiled and looked down at him. Glad to see you're still here. He grumbled, shut up. Rias just laughed before she saw one of her closest and oldest friends standing besides her. She faced her. Hello Sauna. I see you've acquainted yourself with our new group member. Yes I have Rias. And I must say, you've picked quite a wild card to side with. Sauna adjusted her glasses. I didn't know you were the kind of girl to pick up the rambunctious type. Naruto's eyebrow twitched. Rambunctious. What was he, a fucking toddler? Yufufufu, Bucho always was the kind of person that took reckless and unplanned decisions, don't you think? Akino said with a cheerful tone. Oh yes, I completely agree. Sauna responded as the two girls laughed. Hey, you guys aren't actually talking about me right to my face, are you? That's terrible. Rias complained as she started talking more with the two girls as they just continued quietly conversing about her bad points. Naruto leaned back into his chair as he heard the people talk. Why are three of the most popular girls in school coming around Uzumaki's desk? Is he paying them or something? Or threatening them? How'd he even get Gremory-sama's attention in the first place? I heard he knocked into her in the hall the other day. Maybe he took something from her to get her attention. Scoundrel. That bastard. We need to teach him a lesson. We have to stop him before he starts using what he has over her to force himself on her. He seems like the type who would hold her nice, supple body in his arms and decide to. You know tilde. Naruto said loud enough to get the attention of everyone in the room, an effective part of whispering and spreading rumors. Is actually whispering, you nosy assholes. Everyone jumped back in fright when the blonde man yelled as loud as he could before they swarmed out of the room. After they were all gone, only the blonde man and the three girls around his desk remained. As they looked at the door everyone ran out of. They girls turned in sync to look at the blonde calmly pack his bag before he noticed their stares. I never really cared what any of them said because I could give two shits what a bunch of nameless assholes say about me. But damn if they aren't loud about it. Rias crossed her arms under her chest and smiled, see tilde. This is why he's in my group. I'm not in your group, Rias. Naruto said as he looked up at her and explained, when I helped that pervert save the nun girl, he promised that I would be done with this crap. And I am. Naruto, there's something you need to know about the workings of our peerage. Rias gave a cheeky smile. Issei is the one who made that promise. Not me. Naruto was silent before he hung his head and shook it. He stood out of his chair with his bag and started walking away. I'm getting my lunch. Oh, that sounds great. Rias turned to Sauna. Do you want to join us? We can have some tea I just purchased. Oh, that sounds lovely. Wonderful. Then we can all have it together. Rias picked up her bag and followed Naruto out the door. Naruto, we're all going to eat lunch together at the club. No, we aren't. We're going to take a left after you're done buying your bread. Leave me alone. You're not that lucky. Damn it. Devil. We are never going to associate with you again. We can't ever be friends with a man who has such a beautiful girl sleeping in his home. Probably making him breakfast and cleaning his room. Finding his dirty magazines and telling him she can be his dirty material from now on. We don't ever want you to be seen with us again, traitor. Issei stared flatly at his two friends. Sure guys, whatever you say. But you do understand that you two are the ones following us, right? Motohama and Matsuda had been following Issei and Asia around the school as Issei was giving her the tour. While Asia looked around with stars in her eyes at all the new locations in school, Issei was trying to ignore his friends' constant arguing and bickering. Asia excitedly pulled on Issei's sleeve. Issei-san, are these all classrooms? In the church I was raised in there was only one classroom where we were taught everything. Do each of these classrooms teach something different? Kinda. It sort of just depends on the teacher. Don't ignore us, you smug bastard. You think now that you've got some ass to tap that we aren't even here anymore. Issei growled and glared back at them. You guys just told me that I should never talk to you again. And you were just gonna do it. You fucker. What exactly is going on here? As the pervert trio argued between each other and Asia tried to mediate between them, a small crowd of people formed around them to watch the fight. And when the new voice made itself known, the crowd parted and the pervert trio and Asia looked to the man that had emerged. He was a young man about the same age and height as Issei and his friends. He had messy, dirty blonde hair and strong gray eyes. He was in his white school uniform and had his arms crossed in a commanding fashion in front of him. Asia watched as some students started to murmur between themselves as Issei and the others just sighed tiredly at his appearance. She gently pulled on Issei's hand. Who is that? Issei tiredly scratched his head. He's the new secretary of the student council, I think. His name is Saji something. Genshiro Saji. He replied as he looked over the three men in disgust. And you three are the perverts, I presume. I should have known it would be you idiots causing so much trouble. The three men in question pouted and grumbled annoyingly as Saji just shook his head, and also. He stayed silent when he saw the vision of beauty that was a blonde girl that looked at the scene in confusion. He blinked in surprise before he stepped over to her with a smile on his face. Hello, you're the new student that transferred into the school today, right? Asia blinked before she realized he was asking her. Oh, yes. She bowed her head lightly. I'm Asia Argento. It's a pleasure to meet you, Genshiro Saji. And it's an absolute delight to meet you, Asia-san. Saji said as he gently grabbed her hands and started shaking them. If you have any questions or concerns about this school, please, don't hesitate to ask me anything. It's my duty to make sure your experience in our little school is as memorable as possible. Asia was a little surprised by his eagerness to talk to her and felt a little embarrassed. Thank you, but. Asia felt someone grab her shoulders and softly pull her out of Saji's grip. After Issei placed her to the side, he stepped in and grabbed Saji's hands in her place. He then squeezed with as much strength as he could muster as a pawn, causing Saji to yelp and grind his teeth in pain. Issei smiled pleasantly as he tightened his grip. It's quite all right, Mr. Secretary. We don't need you. I'm more than enough to help Asia around the school, so you can just go away into a little corner and die. You've got a surprising amount of grip, Saji said as he started to squeeze back, surpassing Issei as he was starting to feel the pressure being put back on him. Saji groaned, but from a pervert. I'm guessing it's because of your wanking hand. Ah, my wanking hand. Issei screamed in pain before he and Saji started a little contest of strength to outdo the other. After a few moments, everyone watched as the two separated and started blowing on their aching hands. Of course Issei would start showing his alpha tendencies around any other guy coming towards Asia-chan. Matsuda cried as Motohama consoled him. First he gets her to live in his house, now he's setting up a territory. Saji stopped blowing on his hand and raised his head in confusion. Wait, what? What's this about sharing a house? The crowd interjected. Argento said she was living with Hyodo in his house. And some of us are worried about Argento-san's choice of housing. It can't be safe for a girl like that to sleep in the same house as a pervert like that. Yeah. Not to mention it ain't fair that he's so lucky. Lucky bastard. On any other day Issei would be smiling happily that the normal people in class were jealous of him, but right now was not that time because they were blabbing to a member of the student council. He saw Saji's mouth stay agape while everyone said their piece before he looked at the people in question. Is this true? Kind of. It's a long story. A long story that ends with the new student living in your house. Quote. Yes. Care to take some time? Saji said as he crossed his arms expectantly. Issei felt his eyes twitch as he saw everyone else lean towards them from his peripheral vision, waiting to hear the story. He had to come up with something. Shit. Why was he drawing a blank now of all times? Well, the circumstances around Asia-san's housing are rather complicated. Everyone looked towards the voice to see the Prince of Kuo, Yudo Kiba, walking towards them to join their conversation. As was customary, the girls all nearly fell to their knees and swooned. Kiba-kun tilde. At the sight of him as all the males just glared at him and grumbled because of his natural ability to make girls quiver. Kiba approached the little group at the center of the crowd and explained, you see, Asia-san transferred here from a Catholic school in Italy. She had a little family trouble back home and she was sent here to live with another member of her family. But there were some complications and Issei-kun, being the nice boy he is, offered her lodging in his home. Saji looked at him strangely and raised an eyebrow at the handsome man. And how do you know about this? Because we offered Asia-san a chance to join the occult research club along with Issei-kun. And we were kept up to date on the whole debacle as we all came together to help her out. So please, do understand that there isn't anything indecent about this housing. Everyone looked at the little group in surprise before they started whispering between each other. Saji relaxed a little as he thought about their circumstances. Kiba sent a thumbs up to his fellow club members as Issei cried a little and sent him a thankful nod for fixing their mess. Intel. What about her family? Matsuda asked. Kiba blinked. Beg pardon. Her family. You said she came to stay with her family, right? What about them? Why doesn't she stay with them? The crowd started talking between themselves and asking the same question as the orc members started to panic. Kiba sweated a little as the cover story he made started being questioned. Well, you see. His eyes started darting around for something that could save him at the 11th hour but was drawing a blank. Until, as if by divine intervention, a solution rounded the corner and Kiba's mind found an answer that would quell their problems temporarily. You guys are totally ruining my lunch with your pestering. Come on Naruto, it isn't going to kill you to come eat at the club. Naruto grumbled, yeah, I'm not trusting the woman who got me thrown out of work and forced to come here. I'd rather. Naruto felt an arm clamp around his bicep and he was pulled towards a small crowd of second-year students that looked on in shock. Kiba placed Naruto to his side and right beside Asia. He smiled and gestured to the taller blonde. This is Asia-san's older brother, Naruto Uzumaki-san. Naruto choked on his sandwich when he heard that knight say that as the entire crowd of people felt their jaws unhinge. Issei actually cried into his hands as they started digging themselves deeper into a hole. Kiba continued, yes. Naruto-san and Asia-san were raised together since they were children. But their parents got a divorce a few years ago and they were separated when their parents moved away from each other. After a while, Naruto-san moved here and took his mother's last name to live by himself while Asia-san stayed in Europe to receive her education. But now Asia-san is taking the opportunity to travel and came here with the plan of staying with her brother, but due to some economic troubles, Asia-san couldn't stay with Naruto-san and had to stay with Issei-kun instead. Rias smiled smugly and nodded her head in pride as her peerage member convinced everyone of a bogus story he had come up with on the spot. She had to remember to congratulate Yudo later for thinking on his feet. All of the students looked between the nervous Asia and the defeated Naruto as they tried to connect the dots. On closer inspection, they did kind of look similar. They had the same tone of blonde hair and their eyes were vibrant like jewels. Although their respective sizes were something to question because Naruto towered over Asia by at least a foot. Although since he was the older brother that may have had a hand in his stature. While a few of the students still questioned the story, they heard a loud clap and looked over to see the student council president looking unamused with the two great Oni-samas right behind her. She got their attention. All right everyone, that's enough bickering. As you can see, this is a personal issue that has been solved between the parties in question and the matter has been resolved. Now I know all the second years were given a free period because of the midterm tests at the end of the week, so unless all of you want to spend the rest of the period out here facing the wall with buckets on your heads, I suggest you go about your day. All of the gathered students flinched at the commanding dominance in Sauna's voice and started to thin out in numbers. Issei, Asia, and Saji were about to leave too before Sauna interjected, hold on you three. Why don't we all take a moment to properly acquaint ourselves? Rias walked over to the frozen Naruto and poked his side, causing him to sway. You all right? Kiba bowed his head with his hands over his head. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was thinking on my feet and then you walked by and I had an idea. I'm so sorry. Naruto was pale and slowly shook his head. This is why I hate school. Devil. Sue, you're the new pawn of Gremory Senpai's peerage. Along with Uzumaki Senpai. And Asia-san is your bishop. Saji said in utter disbelief as he glared at the brown-haired pervert. And you're the new pawn to the school president's peerage. Who's also a pure-blooded devil like Bucho. And who made the entire student council into her peerage. Replied Issei in an equally defeated tone as he matched the glare from the council secretary. That's right. Rias said from the couch as she gestured to her oldest friend sitting beside her. Her real name is Sona Citri, heiress to the Citri family and an old friend of mine. Now I hope you all can get along with each other because there's a strong possibility we will be working alongside them in the future. Sona chuckled as she picked up her cup of tea. I'm surprised we haven't already, knowing our families. You're telling me. Rias said tiredly before she looked to Sona, where's Tsubaki? She had to do some work for the council and she said she was going to spend her lunch period catching up on it. That's a shame. Akino added as she placed a tray of hot tea on the small table between two couches. She placed one of the cups in front of the nervous blonde nun who heard the arguing behind her. I'm sure she would have been very interested in meeting our new members. Asia turned over in the couch and looked back as Kiba continued to apologize to Naruto as he silently finished his yakisoba bread. He pleaded, please don't be upset Naruto-san. All the other students were getting reckless and asking questions and I had to do what I thought would direct the attention away from us. Naruto tossed the rest of his lunch in his mouth before clapping his hands together to knock off the crumbs. He swallowed and looked at the handsome blonde, but now you've made her related to the person everyone believes is the most unpleasant guy in the school, along with living with the most perverted guy in. I can only guess the entire world. Hey! Issei yelled angrily in protest. Are you sure that was for the best? As Kiba looked at him, Asia softly whimpered, excuse me. The little blonde nun watched as the waiter from the ramen shop looked at her and she felt like she had shrunk under his gaze. She squeezed the couch cushion in her hand before looking up at him. I know this must have caused you a lot of strife to worry about me. And I also know that you helped Issei-san and everyone else in rescue me from the church. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you, but. She bowed her head and closed her eyes as she finished. Thank you for helping me so much. Naruto saw the hesitant, cowering, but still firm look in Asia's eyes as she gave her honest thanks for his help. The poor and pitiful look in her eyes. She couldn't have looked more like a sad puppy if she tried. Naruto grumbled a little before closing his eyes and sighing in defeat. Asia felt a familiar palm rest on her head and pat the top of her hair gently. Naruto muttered, yeah well, as long as you're okay with it then I guess I can't complain. Asia looked up at him with starry eyes and a big smile before she nodded her head and sat back down in her seat. The older students watched in amusement as Asia congratulated herself on thanking the older blonde for his help. And they all stifled a laugh at the look on Naruto's face as Kiba sympathetically patted his back. Issei stood off to the side and glared, jealous that Asia got along with their blonde senior. He felt someone nudge his elbow and saw Saji giving him a toothy grin. Looks like you're gonna have to appeal to the older brother to get her attention. Issei growled, shut up. You could start calling him Oni-sama. I said shut up. Or how about Oni-chan? I said shut it asshole. Issei tackled Saji to the ground and the two pawns started rolling on the floor while attacking each other. Everyone except Asia and Kiba ignored the two juniors fighting as Rias took a quick sip of her tea. She looked towards the older blonde as he plopped down on the couch opposite and leaned back into it comfortably. Rias noticed a tinge of pain cross his face for a moment before he instantly covered it with his usual mask. Rias smiled at him, isn't it fun to come to school? You never know what you're going to experience. Naruto let out a small scoff. Well, I can definitely say I've never met a second devil family or become an older brother before when I went to school. Great. Then let's see how the rest of the school year goes together. No way. Naruto denied while shaking his head and waving his hands. You may have convinced Gramps today, but I can totally change that with a bowl of ramen and some spiked broth. Oh come on. It would be fun. For you. You're enjoying the hell out of this. And I'm sure you can too. I just need to find a way to convince you to stay. PFF'd. Naruto stifled a laugh as everyone looked between the two seniors as they talked between each other. Naruto shook his head. Sorry Rias, but I don't think you'd be able to convince me to stay in school. Oh. Rias raised an eyebrow with a miffed expression as she took his comment as a shot at her pride. She mused, wanna bet? The king proudly stood out of her seat and crossed her arms under her bosom. It's Golden Week next week, which means we have a break from school. Before we come back from break, I will find some way to convince you to stay in our group. If I can, not only do you have to come to school, but you have to stop being stubborn and join our club. Naruto looked at the challenging expression on her face before he grinned menacingly. He slowly got up and stood opposite of the crimson-haired ruined princesses as he placed his hands on his sides. Okay. And if you can't convince me, you can't use any more tricks to make me come to school and you drop trying to bring me into the club, got it? Rias raised her finger. One catch. You have to attend the rest of the week. No coming late. No leaving early. You have to be a normal student like the rest of us. Plus, it gives me a few more chances to meet you face to face. She held out her hand. Deal. Naruto continued his staring contest with the confident Gremory before he grasped her hand and shook it. Deal. The rest of the group in the room looked at the two after their strange deal and wondered what was wrong with the both of them. Sona placed her cup down and looked at Akino. They act like a bitter old married couple. Akino just laughed. I've actually started to notice that the more I see them interact. Rias and Naruto finished their handshake before she looked up at the slightly taller blonde. Well, if you are going to come to school for the week, we should at least take care of that shoulder for you. Naruto looked at her flatly before she smiled. Oh come now, did you think I wouldn't notice? It's just the same as last time. She sat back down and looked up at him. No point in hiding it, we've got a healer now who can take care of it for you. While the rest of the room looked between the two in confusion, Naruto grumbled and removed his uniform. He was left in just an orange shirt before he grabbed at the bottom of it and pulled it over his head. When he took off his shirt, the sight of bandages wrapped around his shoulder and the top of his chest for support were revealed to everyone in the room. Rias looked to her new bishop, Asia. Do you mind fixing him up? Oh, of course not, Bucho-san. With the attention set on her, Asia clumsily fumbled out of her seat and ran around the couch until she was behind Naruto. She nervously asked, where are you, hurt? Naruto pulled a tight strap of his bandage before he ripped it with his teeth and started undoing it. As he undid more of the bandage, it revealed darker and wider specks of blood before he pulled the last of it off. Asia saw the injury on the back of Naruto's shoulder and grew pale. Issei came to her side. What is it, Asia? What's oh? Oh wow. Ew. Oh man senpai, that's disgusting. Oh it smells too. Saji came over and shivered at the sight of the healing wound. Ew, it looks like the dried skin on top of lasagna or something. It follows you around the room. Hey assholes. Naruto yelled angrily as he scared the younger people behind him. You dumbasses want to give it a rest and let her fix my shoulder. Issei and Saji looked between each other before taking a step back and giving Asia room to work. She used her twilight healing and placed her hands over his injury as a green light covered them. Sona and Saji watched in amazement as after a few moments, Asia lowered her hands and Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. He circled his shoulder around and felt no discomfort from his injury. He flexed his arm and smiled. Wow, that feels great. No pain or anything. He looked back at the young nun. Thanks Asia. Why you're welcome. Asia eagerly replied as she was glad she was able to help him out. Naruto grabbed his orange shirt and pulled it back over his head. Rias asked, so, how do you feel? Better I hope. I don't know. Only one way to find out. Naruto said as he fixed up his shirt and made sure it was on him properly. He grabbed the white shirt of his school uniform and then stood there silently. Hey fuck face. Issei flinched when he heard the kind tone in Naruto's voice when he used that nickname. Naruto held his uniform for a moment and spun it around. So Rias told me that she found out where I work because a little devil told her about it. He looked over to him and smiled kindly. You wouldn't have done such a thing after all the help I gave you, right? Issei dove for the door. Promotion. Nig. Naruto snagged Issei's feet in midair with his uniform shirt as the pervert fell flat on his face. Naruto stood over him and shook his head. That was actually kinda cute. You thought your little devil abilities were going to save you. Naruto grabbed Issei's collar and started pulling him into the hallway. Issei cried and looked at the people that were watching it happen. Help. Help. Someone. Anyone. He's a lunatic. He knows no mercy. Not like this. Not like. Slam. Everyone looked at the front door after Naruto had closed it behind them. Everything was silent. Bam. My face. Crash. My spine. Ah. Snap. Why is no one stopping this? Asia and Saji were cowering in place as they heard the hallway get destroyed and Issei's screams of agony following behind not long after. Kiba cringed when he heard Issei scream like a girl after getting kicked in the groin as he looked at his president. Should I stop them? No. It's all right Yuto. Just give them a moment and I'm sure they'll stop. They're boys, it's in their nature to roughhouse. That doesn't bend that way. That doesn't bend that way. That doesn't bend that look at it go. Rias sweated a little, on second thought. Asia, be on standby in case there's an emergency. Sona shook her head and sipped her tea. There's always a party when I come over here. Devil. Naruto walked out of the school building as the final bell stopped ringing. He stretched out his back and let out a long moan as he was finally free from the cooped-up hell. The day was long, boring, and a pain in the ass. But he did get to beat the living shit out of Issei before he had to run to his next period. So that was worth it. Naruto stretched out his achy shoulders as he contemplated what to do next. Rias was going to spend the next few days trying to convince him to stay with her group. He wasn't going to be able to put off this decision for very much longer. But it wasn't just his part anymore. Rias was going to have to prove herself somehow. As Naruto's mind wandered, a small figure walked in front of him before stopping when she spotted him. Naruto looked down and saw Koneko with her school bag in hand and the same stoic look on her face. She was walking out of school before she spotted him and stayed in place when they noticed each other. Naruto greeted her, "Hey." Koneko nodded, "Hello. Are you heading home now?" "Yes. But I have to come back later for the club." "That sound like a pain in the ass." Koneko just gave a small hum before looking up at the tall man. "I didn't think you liked coming to school." Naruto grumbled, "I don't, but Rias sorta forced my hand. She came to the place I work and basically coaxed my boss to make me come toti." Koneko took note of how he used her name so casually. "Sucks to be you." Naruto actually laughed at her comment. It was funny to talk with a girl that had such a sharp tongue and basically spoke in monotone. He continued, "Yeah, but now I have a bet going on with her for the rest of the week." Koneko tilted her head in interest as Naruto continued, "During the lunch break, she made a bet with me that she could convince me to stay at school and in the club before we come back from Golden Week. I said she couldn't. And so I'm gonna stick around for the rest of the week, so you're probably gonna be seeing me around a little more often." Naruto then chuckled, "Of course that's just gonna cause fuckface to freak out, considering I basically beat him like a punching bag for selling me out. You see, Naruto stopped talking when he looked down at Koneko and saw something he had never seen from the little rook before. Koneko had a slightly miffed look on her face and a small pout aimed up at him. Naruto was silent. He was caught off guard by the stoic girl's slight change in expression that he didn't know what to say. In the short time he had known her, she had never shown any change in her mannerisms or expression even after everything they had done. Was she mad that most of her club gathered together without her? That wasn't their fault. Freshmen had a different lunch period and they weren't doing tests like the upperclassmen, so they didn't get a break this week. Was she mad because she didn't get to see him beat up Issei? That was totally a possible choice. If Issei acted like a pervert in front of the stern, no-nonsense girl like Koneko, then she probably really wanted to see someone kick his ass. Naruto felt panicked. Are you mad? No. Koneko said as she turned away from him. You sure? Because you seem kinda upset. I'm not. Naruto didn't want to leave the little freshman on a bad note because he liked her. He thought she was funny and she always had something snarky to say. Who wouldn't want a friend like that? As Koneko was about to walk away, Naruto came up with an idea. He asked, "Hey." Koneko stopped for a moment before looking back at him. You want something to eat? Kaneko's stomach grumbled for a moment before she turned around and slapped her tummy to stay quiet. She turned back around like nothing happened. No money. Naruto smiled. That's okay. Devil. Ahahaha. First Rias-san, now this little cutie. Naruto, where the hell are you pulling these girls from exactly? Miyamoto chided his young worker as he cleaned the dishes and the workstation. Koneko ignored the attention she was getting from the shop owner and several other patrons that had entered the shop for a quick meal. Naruto droned, yeah, whatever Gramps. Look, I said she could have a few meals on me, so you can just add the price to the debt, okay? Yeah, sure kiddo. Miyamoto grabbed his keys and headed to the back entrance before he looked to his sole employee. Hey, I have some renovations happening at my house and I need to go check that everything's alright. Can you handle the place while I'm gone? Don't I always? Don't get smart, kid. He waved him goodbye. See ya in a minute. Naruto hummed before he just started walking to the other customers and made sure their meal was good. Koneko took a moment from eating her ramen to look back and watch Naruto serve the customers. He talked with some of them lightly, probably regular customers he had gotten accustomed to, and showed a small smile on his face while he did. Koneko had never seen the blonde man show such a simple smile. He grinned and laughed when Issei acted like an idiot and he showed her support when she was being reprimanded for her language, but that was it. He still hadn't shown such a carefree expression around them yet. Naruto came back around the counter and continued cleaning up the kitchen before he looked over to the white-haired girl. He asked, how's the ramen? Koneko slurped up the noodles and gave an agreeable hum. He smiled, good. Gramps is gonna be happy to know he has another fan. Naruto decided to leave the girl to her meal as he started to clean up his station. Everything was silent besides the background noise of people walking outside and eating ramen inside. I think you would like staying with us. Naruto stood up when he heard the small voice reach his ears and turned towards the freshman looking up at him. He asked, what? The Occult Research Club. And Buku's peerage. I think you would like being with us. Naruto dried his hands with his towel before placing it in the pocket of his new apron and leaning back to sit on the deactivated stove. He crossed his arms. Why do you think that? Because it is just like Issei-senpai said, you act kind of like you don't care about others, but when you knew we needed help in saving Asia-senpai you came and helped. You tried to protect me when we were fighting the pervert exorcist and you let Issei-senpai choose what he wanted to do with that woman that hurt you all. And when you talked about your bet with Bucho, I thought you seemed really happy even if you didn't show it, like you belonged with us. Koneko stirred her broth a little. It would be fun if you stayed with us. We can fulfill the wishes of the people around town and make sure the town is safe. Plus, we always eat together over the weekends at the club. And you haven't gotten a chance to throw Gaia-kun around yet, so I think you would like that. She looked up at him with a hinge of uncertainty in her eyes. I'm sure you could find something with us to make you stay. Naruto looked at her and closed his eyes. He scratched his head and nodded. Honestly, you guys are annoying, weird, stubborn, and none of you seem to take no for an answer. And you guys are some of the most fun I've had in a while. Naruto admitted with a small smile before he shook his head. And honestly, if it was just a group like you guys, I might think about joining. But this war, this hatred between races, if it's anything like what happened at the church with that Yuma woman, then how can I just walk into that willingly? You won't always be lucky enough to resurrect the dead through limited magic or break the minds and existences of other people by tearing out those gear things to stop the fighting. The worst thing about war, you lose the things and people you hold dearest to you and you can't ever get them back. One of the first things Rias told me when I was reborn, he said as he placed his hand over his chest, was that we were at war with other factions for centuries. And after the last week, I could see it was never going to stop until only one side was left standing. He looked at the petite freshman. Would you be ready for that? Fighting for the devils even though you might never be the same when it's all over. Is it worth it? Koneko let his words sink in for a moment as she placed her chopsticks down. She was silent before she slowly shook her head. No. I don't think I've met any devils that I would truly lay my life down to fight for. You're right. Naruto just closed his eyes after hearing her admit to his question. And after a moment, but Koneko looked up at him with firm resolve in her eyes. I wouldn't fight for the devils. I would fight for Bucho. Koneko continued as she ignored the look on Naruto's face. Bucho is someone I would give my life and soul 1,000 times over to save. Because I owe her at least that if not more. Before she found me, I didn't have anyone anymore. I was willing to let my life go on any path it took because I didn't belong anywhere. But I was found, and then Bucho took me in. She didn't care what I was or what I could do, she just saw someone that needed something she could guide and took me in. And when I looked at her, when she hugged me and told me I didn't have to be afraid anymore, I really believed that there was nothing in this world I wouldn't face to help her. Koneko looked at her meal, and not just me. Akano-senpai. Yuto-senpai. Gaia-kun. Issei-senpai. Asia-senpai. We all believe in her because she cares about us and would risk everything to save us. And even if I might suffer, I would fight for her until my last breath. Koneko looked back up at the older blonde, and I'm sure you can see that too if you tried, Naruto-senpai. Naruto was silent after Koneko had finished spilling her heart. She saw the expressionless look on his face and lowered her head in sadness. She really believed that he would give them a chance if he heard it from someone that experienced their life. But just as Koneko felt ready to give up, she felt Naruto's hand land on her scalp and started rubbing through her hair. She lifted her head to see the whiskered blonde with a happy smile on his face. He grinned and chuckled a little. Well, I guess we'll just have to find out, huh? Before she could ask what he meant, he lifted his hand off her soft white hair and walked further back into the kitchen to finish up his work. He accurately pointed at her bowl without looking back and said in a teasing voice, "Don't leave that unfinished, young lady. It's rude to not finish a meal your elders paid for." Koneko pouted, unamused by his teasing before she picked her chopsticks back up and started eating her meal. When she was done, she ordered a second bowl of the same ramen. And another. And another. By the time Miyamoto got back, Koneko had eaten several bowls of their product and left Naruto further in debt than he already was. Which explained the partially weeping blonde that was begging the unflinching freshman to stop. Devil. Rias was sitting alone in the room her club based around and let her eyes wander from where she was supposed to be paying attention. The rest of her peerage were taking turns showing Issei and Asia their clients and wish fulfillment, so Rias took this alone time to finally confront what she had been dreading to do all day. Ojo-sama, I know you are there. Are you listening to me? Rias was shaken out of her thoughts before she looked back down at the magic circle on her desk. She sat up in her chair before addressing the voice from her magic circle, yes. Sorry Graphia, I let my mind wander for a moment. I know this experience is not to your liking Ojo-sama, but this is a decision you need to make right now. Rias leaned into her chair and crossed her arms under her chest. You know, if I could actually make a choice, I would choose to cancel this stupid wedding right now. And we cannot do that, Ojo-sama. Razor-sama wishes to meet you again before the wedding and he requests we do it immediately. So please give me a period of time when you might be free to meet. Rias rolled her eyes and grumbled in her seat. They gave her freedom to choose this. Not her own life. Her destiny. Her love life. Just when she would be allowed to meet the man who she was being forced to marry. And it must be before the weekend, if you can. Typical. That seemed like some kind of karmic justice for something she did wrong. Forcing Naruto to come to school maybe. No, that was just funny. Rias thought for a moment before she said loud enough for the maid to hear, Friday. After classes. I'll be done with all my tests and it will be before the break. Seems like a good time to do it. Very well. Sears-sama also wishes me to come and mediate the meeting myself, so I will be arriving the night before to set it up with you. I hope this does not intrude on your day. Rias actually showed a small smile before she leaned forward to deactivate her magic circle, of course not Graphia. It's always a pleasure. I'll see you soon. The magic circle disappeared and Rias was left sitting in silence in the room. Rias didn't want to let her life be decided for her before she even got a chance to make it. So her mind started to turn and calculate how she could escape this event. And still keep the lifestyle she was only just starting to form with her peerage. Rias looked at the blonde man she had called outside to talk to and smiled. She nodded. What do you say? Naruto replied, no. Oh come on Tilda. Why not? Rias replied exhaustedly as she started following behind Naruto, who walked through the partially empty gym field. She ran up to his side. We have tests tomorrow and I'm sure you need to study. I've been told how atrocious your grades are. Yeah, you've told me. Akano Himehima has told me. Kaichu has told me. The teacher has told me. And I'm starting to get the message you all are trying to get across. Naruto deadpanned as he rolled his eyes. Then why are you disagreeing? Naruto looked at her, because I don't want to have a study hall at my place. I kinda like to think that's my little place to unwind and leave all my worldly troubles behind. Especially school. Rias was quiet as she just blinked. So you never study? Nope. Even though your grades suffer. And I couldn't be happier. Rias just scowled. You're a very stubborn man, you know that. He gave a cocky smile. It's been 2 weeks, Rias. I thought you would have realized that about me already. Rias had a stern look on her face before he turned around. But she was already in front of him and pointing at his face, and you should know just how stubborn I can be when I want to. So, I've prepared a compromise. Naruto raised his brow while Rias took on a stern and serious expression. She closed her eyes and concentrated before looking up at him. If you let me study with you at your place, I will pay for any food you might want delivered. Pizza. Yes. Ramen. Of course. Fast food. Yep. I might eat so much you could go bankrupt. I would love to see you try. Anything. Anything you can get your little mitts on. Rias smiled and held out her hand. Do we have a deal? Naruto looked between the girl and her hand. For one, he just knew if he did this something bad was going to happen. On the other hand, he could eat like a fat king and still not feel guilty about it. Damn it. Where'd you learn to manipulate people over with such good deals? Hee, I grew up with my older brother. If I wanted anything in the world, I just had to promise him a smile, hug, or kiss on the cheek and he was putty in my hand. You're the devil. Thank you for the compliment. Devil. Okay everyone, class dismissed. Don't forget that we have exams tomorrow, so if you have to, spend some time tonight studying. If you miss the first bell then you will be locked out of class and unable to take the exams. The teacher packed up his supplies and started heading for the door. I will see you all tomorrow. Naruto let out a long sigh of relief that he was able to survive another day in this boring hell known as school. He started gathering up any papers or supplies in his desk and put them in his school bag. So, I really want to know. Naruto looked up just in time to see Akino leaning over his desk. She looked at him. Is there a plan you have for the tests tomorrow? Or are you just going to hope for a miracle? Naruto sent a small glare at her. Is that any of your concern? Akino shook her head. Not concern. More of an innocent interest. Right. An innocent interest. Naruto snarked. And I'm a straight A student. Akino giggled at the obvious joke. Before they could continue, Sona walked out of her seat and came over to them. I'm actually quite interested as well. From what I've seen so far, you come up with different ways to sort out your problems, Uzumaki-kun. She crossed her arms. Will you actually attempt to work on the exams, or can you not be bothered? Oh, I wish I couldn't be bothered. But unfortunately, I have many different pains in my ass that constantly take time out of their schedules to remind me. Two of which I'm talking to right now. The two girls looked between each other indignantly as the blonde man leaned back, but if you have to know, then I found someone that's going to help me study. It just came at a terrible price. Sona and Akino were intrigued. Sona asked, and what terrible price might this be? Naruto. Everyone in the classroom looked towards the door as the crimson-haired, most popular girl in school appeared just outside their room. Rias seemed eager as she stood at the doorway ready to leave. Don't just sit on your butt, hurry up. We've got to get moving. Everyone in the classroom was silent before they mechanically turned their heads towards the whiskered blonde. He felt their stares and grumbled a little before he pushed himself out of his chair. He started making his way to the door as Rias jumped on her feet and started going for a head start. As Naruto was about to walk through the door, he saw people lean in towards each other to start whispering. He immediately pointed at them, getting everybody's attention. He shook his finger. Not a word. Not even when I'm gone. Naruto walked out of the room as everyone left inside were completely silent. They didn't want to invoke the blonde's anger, but at the same time the need for gossip was becoming unbearable. Sona sat on Naruto's desk and smiled. A study session with Rias. Akino placed a hand on her cheek. Era, he wasn't kidding about paying a terrible price. Devil. Well, I have to say, I'm a little jealous. Why would you be jealous? Because I found your ramen shop first that same day. But you didn't show me any special treatment. I think you were picking favorites. Stop complaining. I'm serious. Rias pouted at the taller blonde. When I showed up, you were doing everything you could to push me away. But not only do you invite Koneko, but you also paid for her meals. Naruto slumped a little. That was a serious mistake on my part. So why did you do it? I don't know. Naruto shrugged as they walked through the local park. I saw her after school, told her we all had lunch together. She seemed kinda upset that she wasn't included, and so I tried to make it up to her. There's something about the disappointed look on that girl's face that just compels you to try and make up for it. Rias looked off to the side with a sympathetic nod. I know what you mean. Once, I forgot to buy her the special limited sale chocolate she asked for and she didn't say anything for a week. I nearly bought out an entire candy shop to make it up to her. Rias smiled. That girl is still a mystery to me even after all this time. After the two seniors finished their discussion of their favorite precocious little freshman, Rias took a moment to look around where they were passing through. She noticed that there were fewer and fewer people around this part of town, and even that some of the accommodations were less than up to date. She spoke. Do you live all the way out here? If you do, I'm sorry I've been asking you to make the trek to school. Don't be. It may seem pretty far but I can be fast when I want to. By the way, Naruto looked over to the crimson-haired girl. Fair warning, I live in a place that's kinda like a mix between an apartment complex and a motel. And its cleanliness is about as comparable to a, let's see. Rias chimed in, a pigsty. I was going to say shit stain, but if you want to be polite about it. After a few more feet, Naruto stopped in place and pointed forward, here it is. Home sweet home. Bordering close to the edge of town, there was this two-story building that looks like it had survived through the worst possible scenarios. Some of the paint and skin had started to chip away from such poor caregiving. Rias didn't even need to see the wages to know this place was probably for people that didn't have much money to use. Rias thought for a moment before nervously chuckling at the sight of the place, well, I guess you weren't kidding. No, I was not. As the two teenagers talked, a stocky old man with thinning hair walked out with a newspaper in hand. He spotted the tall blonde and walked up to him, Uzumaki. It's Uzumaki, Taichi-san. Whatever. The crotchety man groaned before he continued, the water heater sprung a leak today. So there might not be much warm water in your shower for a while. I'll try to get it fixed by tomorrow. Naruto slumped, the last time you said that we were out of warm water for almost 2 weeks. Then I'll get to it when I have the time. He replied in a short manner before he saw the girl accompanying his tenant. He looked towards her, who's the girl? Rias blinked when she realized she was being addressed and Naruto opened for her, this is Rias Gremory. A student from my school. She's here t. Ah, stop right there. Taichi interrupted, I don't want to hear about the gross stuff you two are going to be doing in your room. The teens looked between each other before they realized what he was implying and panicked. Rias blushed a little as Naruto shook his head, and no, we aren't doing anything like that. Look, you two have fun. Just remember my rules. Don't be too loud. And if you shit on the floor, you owe me 10,000 yen. The owner of the building walked away and towards his office before Naruto could say anything. Rias looked at Naruto. He was not very pleasant. You don't need to try so hard. I'd just call him an asshole. Naruto said with a smile, getting Rias to giggle a little. He started heading towards the only staircase on the building that lead towards the second floor. As the two teenagers made their way towards the blonde's room, another man walked out of his room and was heading towards the stairs. He was a foreigner at least in his 30s, with brown hair and standing about the same height as Naruto. He saw his fellow tenant and waved, hey, Naruto Mboy, how's it going? Hey Marco, off to go on another bender. Ah, ya know it mate. Stuck in this country, till God knows when, I'ma make sure I can at least grab a drink when I can. He grinned, welcome tea, join me at any time. Still not legal. Then fuck it, I'll drink fair the both of us. The foreigner realized there was a stunning beauty behind the blonde teen that was looking at the scene in confusion. Marco pushed Naruto over like a log and looked the girl over, why, Ello they're beautiful. And who might you be? Rias recognized he was European and nodded her head, hello, I'm Rias Gremory. And I'm a friend of Naruto's. Nice tea, Micha. He bowed in a showy manner. Name's Marco, lover from beyond the seas and lover of women aplenty. And tell me beautiful, what's a lovely lady like you doin' in this neck of the woods? Before Rias answered, Naruto popped back up like a balloon and held the man back. Control yourself horn dog, she came with me. Marco's eyes widened. She came, with you. N. Marco nudged the blonde with a grin. Wow mate, didn't know ya had so much game. Ya got tea, teach me your secret. If you don't stop, I'll make you stop. Rias leaned over and waved to get their attention back. What's going on here exactly? Naruto pushed Marco's elbow away from him before gesturing to the older man. This guy is Marco, some weirdo from across the ocean that came here after him and his wife got a divorce. Basically, me ex was being a cunt and I wanted a break. So now I'm here. Marco proclaimed proudly, I'm travelin' the world. Seein' the sights. And leavin' me mark everywhere I go. Naruto leaned in towards Rias to whisper, and by that, he means genetic mark. What can I say? Ladies love a man with confidence. Marco made a scowl, but now I'm on me last leg. Gotta wait, till me mate back home can wire me some cash. Till then I'll just look around and see what this place has to offer. But enough about that. He leaned in towards the two students. What might you two be doing tonight, eh? They could easily guess what he was implying. Rias answered, we have exams tomorrow so we are gonna study tonight. Ah, study. I get ya. But trust me, it's best not to get caught up in what ya been hearin' around the bend. Marco pulled out his wallet and took something from inside. He grabbed Naruto's hand and placed it inside before looking into his blue eyes. Keep it sacred. Keep it safe. Before Naruto or Rias could ask what he meant. Marlo. They all looked over the edge to see Taichi waving his fist in the air. You owe me 10,000 yen, you son of a bitch. Naruto and Rias looked at the reckless party man in horror at what he had done. He winked before running past them and down the stairs. They watched the landlord chase the party man down the street while yelling obscenities at each other. Naruto took a moment and looked down at what he had been given by Marco. A condom. He threw it over the edge with as much force as he could muster. Rias caught the end of his action and wondered what he had thrown. She asked, did you just throw away the thing Mr. Marco gave you? What was it? Naruto didn't look at her, nothing. Come on. He pulled out his key and unlocked his apartment, walking in first before keeping it open for Rias to follow in. When Rias walked in, she looked the small apartment complex over. The room they had walked into had a small table in the center, Naruto's futon over near the corner, a window just above the bed, and a small sink and fridge off to the side. On the right wall were two doors, probably one a closet and the other a bathroom. Naruto walked in and placed his bag on the floor before heading to the small fridge. Make yourself at home. Kind of cramped, but as long as you don't freak out about small spaces, then it can be a pretty cozy place to stay. As Naruto looked in his fridge, he realized that the redhead hadn't said a single word since they had come in. He looked over to see her still looking around like she was trying to find something. He stood up. In case you're wondering, yeah, this is all there is. I don't have a lot of income, so I've got to make sure I spare as much as possible. The rooms are small and the landlord's a total tool, but this place is cheap, so I can't complain. Rias shook her head. No, it's fine. I don't mind the size or condition of the room. It's just. Rias looked around a little more before looking at the blonde with a confused gaze. You don't live with your parents, do you? Naruto was silent for a moment before he shook his head. No. But I can't live with people that aren't living anymore, so I've got this place to myself. Rias thought it was a possibility that the whiskered blonde lived alone. Ever since the scene in the middle of school the other day when Yuto convinced everybody that Naruto and Asia were family, she had been thinking about where the blonde's family was in all of this. Now, in his living quarters, with no room for family and not even a single photo anywhere to be seen, Rias knew he was alone here. She spoke earnestly. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's not your fault. They've been gone a long time. Naruto looked down for a moment before looking over at her. Let's stop with all the sad talk. It's depressing. You came here to force me to study, right? Rias didn't say anything before she gave a small smile and nodded. She took off her shoes and sat down at his table as he looked back into his fridge. I have water, cola, tea, and iced coffee. Do you want anything? I'm fine with just water. But I'm hungry too. Rias started taking out some books. Do you have anything to eat? Naruto came over and placed a bottled water in front of her with iced coffee for him. He shook his head. Nothing substantial. Perhaps it's time to start calling in all that delicious food now. Rias looked at him wearily. Really? We haven't even started yet. Naruto just stared back silently. But I'm hungry. Rias sighed. Okay, fine. Just call them up and tell me the menu. Naruto blinked. How am I gonna call them? I don't have a phone. Rias looked at him in disbelief. What do you mean you don't have a phone? Look at the place I live. Plus, who the hell am I gonna call? Gramps. Rias felt her eye twitch before she pulled her cell phone out and handed it to him. He smiled and grabbed the phone before he started typing in the numbers. Rias started flipping through her book and just knew it was gonna be a long night. Devil. The sun started to lower through the window as Rias picked out some rice and chewed on it, savoring the taste from the delicious takeout. She pointed at the guy across from her with her chopsticks. So, what can't you understand about this again? I hate math. That's all I really understand about it. Look. Rias stood up and walked to sit by his side as she leaned in. It isn't that hard. For this equation, you have to find the missing side of the right triangle. And to do that, you just have to remember what I said about how to find an hypotenuse. To find the third side, you have to add the squares of the other sides. So if you do this and this. Naruto thought for a moment. I get this, right? Rias nodded. Yes. Is that it? No, that's just one formula. Now you have to learn about some more algebra, degrees in geometry, a little calculus. Naruto slammed his head and groaned, I don't get this. Why don't you get this? Rias started looking over some more of his papers. Some people have trouble with subjects like this, but they still learn the basics of it in secondary school and their first year of high school. She looked over at him. Did you not learn any of this back where you came from? Naruto shook his head. We never bothered with stuff like this. Where I come from, our school specialized more on hands-on stuff for our jobs. Rias looked over her book a little more before asking, what kind of school was that then? Some kind of agricultural school. You could say that. Rias pouted at his useless answer before she looked back at his work. Fine. Don't tell me. But this won't disappear just because you don't want to do it. Now, for this next part. Naruto lifted his head back up. Okay, seriously, how does any of this stuff matter? We're supposed to be planning for our future by learning this, right? He lifted up his workbook and pointed at it. Where in the world am I ever going to need to use a triangle in real life? I don't know, Naruto. Maybe it's supposed to help with a job you get. Rias took the workbook from his hand and pointed at him. It's all supposed to help with your future. How? I don't know what I want to be in the future. But I swear it won't have anything to do with triangles. Rias was about to argue before she realized what he said. She placed the book down and looked at him. You don't have anything you want to be when you grow up. Not really. You can't predict your future or what it holds. So what's the point in planning something you can't control? Naruto said as he fell back and laid on the ground of his apartment. It was silent for a moment before he heard Rias ask, really? Nothing. He shook his head, not that I can think of. Rias felt disappointed for a moment before she looked at the lying blonde. Have you ever wanted to be anything in the future? Naruto was silent for a moment before he opened his eyes again. He lifted himself up on his elbows to look at the redhead. Well, yeah, of course I've wanted to be something before. Rias turned around to listen to him more clearly. Naruto saw her eagerness to listen and sat up before continuing. When I was a kid, and I mean a really little kid, I wanted to be the public leader of the place I grew up in. I didn't have any family and nobody really talked to me, so I thought, hey, maybe if I become the boss, people will notice and respect me. Then they'll have to like me. And for a really long time, I believed that. Naruto continued, so I worked hard all the time and did everything I could to try and prove myself to everybody. It was a pretty rough start, to say the least, and almost everybody ridiculed me for even thinking I could do it, but I still tried. And after a while, I started making a difference. I made friends. I proved myself to people. I showed them I wasn't the complete and utter failure they thought I was. And everything was starting to change. Before I knew it, people were supporting me and telling me I was gonna reach that point someday soon. All those people that were bringing me down and telling me otherwise were starting to smile and cheer me on. I had never been so happy before. And even if I didn't become the leader, I knew these people were going to stay by my side forever. I really thought. Naruto looked off for a moment with a fond smile. I was going to make it. Rias looked at the blonde as he told her more about himself. Nothing specific or detailed, but she could tell just by the tone in his voice and the look in his eyes that this was more than enough. She looked at him for a moment. What happened? Naruto's smile lowered for a second and he looked at Rias. Like I said, you can't control the future. No. Rias crawled up to his face with a stern look in her eyes as she was sick of him cutting her out. You have to tell me something about you. No more of this mystery stuff. Please. Naruto blinked for a moment and looked into her eyes. So, you want me to strip the veil and tell you everything? Rias nodded her head. Naruto smiled and chuckled for a moment before lifting his hand and flicking her forehead, eliciting a little squeak from her. Nope. Rias massaged her forehead and pouted at him as he laughed at the look she was giving him. Rias sat on her feet and looked at him. Can you at least tell me what you are doing here? I can at least know that, right? Naruto pulled himself up to the table. I got hurt pretty bad when I first came here last year. I didn't have any money and nobody knew me, so things were looking bleak. But Gramps picked me up and paid for my medical attention, or at least most of it. But to do that he had to pay it out of his retirement fund and life savings. So, you can imagine how guilty I felt when I found out about this. So I promised that I would pay him back all the money he used to help me. I tried to get a job but I didn't get hired because I didn't have credentials, or nobody wanted a weird foreigner who talked in a weird accent, or I beat up on assholes who were causing problems. So he offered me a job and said half the check he paid me would go to paying him back. That's why I'm here. To make sure I can pay back Miyamoto Jichin so he can have a good retirement. Naruto looked over to see Rias was silent after what he said. It was quiet between them a little longer before she giggled. You beat people up at your old job. Naruto listened to her laugh before he chuckled as well. Hey, they said that I needed to be a bodyguard that didn't let anyone act creepy to the dancers. When someone tried to sniff a girl's hair, I spun him in the air and tossed him out a window. And when the manager tried to tell me to stop, I accidentally threw him out as well. He wasn't too happy about that. Rias couldn't control herself and laughed even louder at his expense. She wiped a tear out of her eye before she said, Want to know something? I've never actually had ramen before. What? Naruto yelled in disbelief. He immediately dove for her phone. Okay, well, I know what we're having next. No, Naruto. We haven't even finished the sushi we ordered before. I can finish that stuff up easily. But you need to have ramen and see how good it is, right now. No arguments. Devil. The sun had finally started to set and the sky went black as the two young adults continued working. They had moved on from math and were now on history. Rias was relaxing on Naruto's small but comfy bed as she went over the notes she had brought with her. It had been a few minutes since they had finished their ramen, which Rias had to admit was delicious, and she was helping him study. After Huju Tokimyun's death, the magistrate Adaki Yasumori was defeated by the Huju family steward _. So, what was the steward's name? Rias waited for an answer but didn't receive one. She realized she was hearing a very soft and rhythmic snoring and looked over to see Naruto sleeping on his arms on the table. Rias narrowed her eyes before she grabbed the pillow behind her and threw it at his head, startling him awake. Awa, what happened? Geez, we're supposed to be studying, you jerk. Rias complained from the bed. You can at least try to stay awake. How? This stuff is boring enough to put anybody to bed. How are you still awake after all of this? Because I like to study subjects like this. Japanese history has always been my favorite subject. Rias said as she curled up and smiled while looking over her favorite parts written in her notebook. It's so rich and diverse and romantic and enticing. Naruto looked at her in mild amusement before shaking his head. You know, a lot of people tell me I've got stamina to spare, but I don't think I've ever seen someone as energetic as you just to learn this stuff. It's exhausting just being around you. You complain just like Akino. She's always telling me about how I smother her while we study together. And why isn't she here right now, enjoying the mind-numbing experience of cram studying with us? Because I thought I would give her a little break. Rias said, she's got years of study dates over you, so just one couldn't hurt. She's dealt with this for years. Naruto asked in disbelief. Geez, I actually have to give that girl some respect for being able to handle that. Rias gave him a conflicted look. Hey, you make it sound like I'm a newborn puppy that doesn't stop barking. Naruto shrugged. You kinda are. He immediately felt her notebook slam into the back of his head as Rias pouted at his teasing. Naruto pulled the book off his head and handed it back to her. So, you've been with that crazy sadist girl for a while, huh? Rias took the book back and nodded. Yeah, for as long as I can remember. Akino has always been the person that stood by my side during everything. Naruto turned back around but showed interest by asking, how exactly did that happen? Well, I met Akino when she snuck into the territory of one of my family's servants. I came up there to play and see the sights, so I was outside near the forest all by myself. Then, I noticed someone running over twigs and hiding behind trees, like she was hiding from something. It was really cold up there in the mountains, so I kept calling to her to come out so I could help. After what felt like hours and was definitely one of the most annoying colds I ever got, she finally came out of hiding and faced me. And even back then Akino was possibly the prettiest girl I had ever seen. Rias wrapped her arms around her knees and looked up at the ceiling while she dug into her memories. She was having some family issues after her mother passed away and she was just wandering around, looking for something to do with her life. I found out she helped exorcise an innocent civilian of an evil spirit in the town downhill and I just knew I had to meet her again. When I found her, my family made some changes and we were able to adopt her into our house. And since then she's basically been the closet thing I've had to an annoying sister ever since. Rias formed a small smile, although now that I think about it, she probably just took up my offer to come with me because I kept bugging her. Naruto shook his head, I don't think so. If that weird girl was anything like Koneko, I'm sure she was earnest and completely honest about her choice to follow you. He turned around and saw Rias looking at him in mild surprise before he shrugged. She told me about how you picked her up and took her in as well. She kept saying that she would never be able to pay you back for all the kindness and love you showed her. Rias blinked a little before giggling a little, that silly girl. Why would she ever think she had to pay me back for being my friend? She shook her head. Her and Yuto have the same problem in thinking they have something to do for me. Naruto actually turned in place to face her and listen to her. Yuto has always acted like that. He tries to handle anything and everything by himself because he doesn't want anything forced on me. Even if he might get tired or hurt in the process, he still strives to fight on and win. That's something I've admired about him, about all of them. Yuto's bravery and calm in any situation. Kaneko's heart and kindness to those she meets. Akino's loyalty and courage to face what's new. That's why I always wanted to stay by their sides. Naruto heard the pride and almost envious tone when she talked about her friend's traits and strengths. Despite what he may have thought about a girl that said these people were her servants, they were closer than family to her. She did not show a single ounce of regret for bringing these people into her life, and she probably never would. Naruto had to ask, why did you resurrect Asia when you had never even met her before? Rias thought for a moment, because she was someone you all proved was worth fighting for. She was an innocent girl that was exposed to unfortunate circumstances. Someone with a heart like a saint that didn't see people because of their religion, class, race or even faction standing. She was a girl I thought would do anything in her power to help people in need. And as it turns out, I was right. What about Issei? You didn't just accept him for his perverted tendencies, did you? Rias laughed. No, of course not. It doesn't matter about his personality or even if it's a problem for him. He summoned me with the very last breath in his body and I came to the scene of his death. He's just an innocent boy, used by a woman he loved and then killed because of a gift he never asked for. He didn't deserve something like that. So I gave him a second chance. And now, despite his rowdy behavior, he's happy and content with his new life. That's more than I could ask for. Then why me? Rias looked over to him as Naruto looked straight at her. I didn't have a special power that you knew about. I didn't summon you. We didn't know each other beforehand. And yet you used one of those evil pieces to resurrect me, someone you had never met before that day. So why? It was silent between the crimson-haired beauty and the whiskered male as Naruto's question hung in the atmosphere. You make it sound like you aren't worth the time. Like it was a mistake. But I know that's not right. Rias sat up on his bed and looked at him. You're right, I didn't know you. And I couldn't sense anything from you like a sacred gear. But let me ask you something. Rias' eyes softened for a moment. Do you remember what happened before you died? Naruto stayed quiet for a moment as he tried to think back to that night. Saving Issei from the Yuma woman. Some arguing. A piercing and crippling pain through his body as everything went cold and nothing. He was gone. I was summoned and I saw that both you and Issei were already gone. Just a few seconds, but it was too late. I remember that you and I had met in the hallway earlier that day and I felt guilty that I wasn't able to save you. But as I reached out to move your hair out of your eyes, your hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Rias looked down and held the place Naruto grabbed her. I thought you were dead. No, you were dead. Your blood was spreading around you like a massive leak and the pain should have killed you but it didn't. Despite blood loss and a hole through your chest, you willed yourself alive and grabbed the closest thing to you. And with the last of your strength, you looked up at me. And I looked into your eyes. I didn't see anger, or fear, regret, pain. In your last moments alive, you didn't show any hesitation of death, because you didn't believe this was the end. In your last moment, I saw a tenacity to live that was stronger than anyone else I had met before. A stubbornness to not give up so easily. She looked into Naruto's blue eyes. I tried to save you with a bishop, a rook, a knight, and any of my pawns, but nothing seemed to work. But, as if by chance, an extra piece I received that shouldn't have even been able to function resonated with you. Even if it's an irregular piece, with no functioning sense or promotion, you made it work and fought for your life. She leaned in a little closer. You act like you're no one or like you can't do anything, but I saw what you are, Naruto Uzumaki. What you think no one else can see. I know you're a survivor. And even if the whole world came tumbling down on you, you would still keep moving because that's who you are. Naruto and Rias were silent after the pure-blooded heiress had spoken her part with a firm strength in her voice. Naruto looked at the table for a moment before asking, "Did you come here tonight trying to convince me to join your peerage?" Rias sat back down after her little burst of spirit and just looked forward. She answered, "I don't know. My head was so jumbled up with everything that I wasn't thinking straight. I just came here because I thought I could step back from everything and take a moment to breathe." Did you get what you wanted? Rias looked back towards him for a moment before she grabbed her notebook and opened it up again. She sat there silently and read the lines of text as Naruto decided to do the same. And for the next hour or so, they were silent. Devil. Rias turned her phone on as she rested her head on the table. She looked at the screen and felt a sense of nervousness, apprehension, and worry build up in her stomach. Thursday. 23:51. Okay. Naruto slammed the book close and rubbed his eyes before moving to his temples. He groaned, "That's enough studying. For the rest of my life." Rias smiled and lifted her head while wiping some fatigue from her eyes. Even she had to admit that this was a long study session. She mused, "Do you think you'll be ready for the exams?" "I don't know anymore. I don't care anymore. I just want the week to end and the break to begin," Naruto said with a laugh before he looked up through his window to see that the lights had started going off and the moon was high in the sky. "It's pretty late. Almost midnight. Seriously." Naruto scratched his head. "I didn't think we would be doing this stuff for that long. Sorry about that." "Don't be," Rias said as she leaned against her hand for support on the table. "I quite enjoyed today, whatever its ups and downs were." "Yeah, but I bet you would have liked to study some in your place, where I bet there was a ton more space than here." Naruto waved his hand around the small room. "It's got to be better in a big luxurious room than this cramped closet of an apartment." Rias just shrugged her shoulders. "Big, small, cramped or cozy. It's all the same if you don't have anyone to enjoy it with." It was silent between them before Naruto asked, "Do you want me to walk you home?" Rias looked at him, mildly surprised by his genuine offer to guide her, and shook her head. "No, don't worry. I can go back home anytime I want with my magic circle." Naruto remembered that little trick with the intricate circle under her feet that helped her teleport and decided to leave it at that. He stood up. "Well, is there anything else you want before you go?" "Actually, could I have another cola, maybe with ice?" Rias looked up at him. "I think I need something to help keep up my energy." "There's a machine for ice downstairs. I'll have to go get it." Naruto opened the door and spoke over his shoulder, "Be back in a minute." Rias was left sitting in the room with a conflicted look on her face. She struggled for a minute and looked back down at her phone. Thursday. 23:54. Naruto grabbed some ice out of a machine by the side of the building and placed it in a small plastic bucket. He looked around, noticing there was no one anywhere to be seen as he closed the machine and made his way upstairs. He opened the door again and walked in. "The ice is from a machine Taichi-san monitors, so it might not be that great. You might want to check the taste and." Rias. Naruto noticed the lights had turned off and the room was empty. The room was noticeably darker and there was no sign of the busty young woman anywhere in sight. Naruto thought she had left early and closed the door, only to then notice that she was standing behind it. He turned around. What or why? Before Naruto could finish, Rias tackled him forward and ran with him long enough before they both fell on his bed, Naruto accidentally dropping the ice on the floor. Naruto was surprised for a moment before he looked up at the girl sitting on him. Rias, what the hell are you doing? I'm sorry Naruto. But I just need you to stay quiet and go along with me, okay? Rias immediately sat up and undid the black collar that surrounded her shoulders and threw it off to the side. And after that, her hands went down to the sides of her skirt and started to pull down the zipper. Naruto felt his composure and calmness start to lose itself as the beautiful crimson-haired girl started to undress herself, taking off her skirt and revealing her white lingerie panties. He almost choked on his tongue as he felt heat go to his face. What are you doing? You said that you didn't want to have anything to do with my group and our dealings, right? Rias started to unbutton her shirt and once it came off, she threw it to the side. Rias was straddling Naruto in her underwear, revealing her gorgeous and curvaceous figure. Naruto's eyes roamed over her long and milky white thighs, her round and plump hips that sat on his chest, her thin waist that went up to a pair of large round breasts barely contained by her bra. Rias fiddled with the strap on her back. Then we can work something out if you do something for me. Rias finally unhooked her bra and slowly slid it off her bountiful chest. Her breasts bounced after her brasserie was removed and she placed it by the side of the bed. She reached down for Naruto's hand and placed it on her left boob, feeling his large rough hand press against her nipple and slowly sink into her breast. She moved some hair out of her face. I need you to have sex with me. Naruto's mind nearly short-circuited. He had to admit, his mind would sometimes go to the gutter, and he did wonder what a gorgeous girl like Rias would be like in bed, but he at no point believed today would lead to anything like that. And at the moment, with a stunning beauty sitting on his chest and his hand forming into her boob, Naruto had but one single regret. He just had to throw away the fucking condom. Naruto's mind started to kick back into work and he tried to think about what was happening. Rias was naked. It was late. Rias was naked. They were tired. Rias was naked. He felt his heart almost jump out of his heart. Rias started to grab the ends of Naruto's shirt and pull it up in an attempt to prepare for the activity at hand. But Naruto's free arm came up and grabbed his shirt before she could take it off. She blinked in surprise before looking at Naruto's stone-faced expression. Naruto. What's wrong? Naruto closed his eyes before a dry smile appeared on his face. You know, I always wondered what my first time would be like. Would it be planned? Spontaneous? Would it be with someone I loved? Or would it be with the first person who offered? Would I remember it? Or would it be one of those next morning experiences you come to regret? I thought a lot about what could happen. But I always thought that whatever happened, we would both be excited about it. And the thing is, your heart isn't beating any faster. Naruto sat up and tensed his right hand a little, causing a small flinch in Ria's face from where her sensitive breast was squeezed. You aren't doing this because you're horny. Or because you're experimenting or curious either. And I know you aren't one of those sluts that just throws themselves at any guy that shows them the least bit of help or hospitality. So then, Rias. Naruto let go of her breast and grabbed her shoulders before looking straight at her. What the fuck are you doing? Rias was caught off guard for a moment before she spoke again. Maybe you don't know me quite as well as you thought. What if I am really one of those bimbos you see in movies and shows that? Rias. Naruto's firm voice interrupted her as he got her attention. I hate it when people lie to me. And even more when they lie to themselves. So please. He almost pleaded with her, stop lying. Rias was silent for a moment as she looked into Naruto's eyes. The air of desperation faded around her and she let her head hang for a moment. She raised a hand to cover her eyes and shook her head. She whimpered, I'm sorry. I'm sorry Naruto. But I just thought that if I could do this, then maybe I could finally put my mind at ease. Naruto felt the regret in her voice and let go of her shoulders. What do you mean? Rias lowered her hand for a moment before grabbing her bra. She covered her breasts up and snapped the clip back together before she hugged her own arms. She spoke with a sad tone. Everything's about to change. Something is about to happen and I might lose everything because of it. My life. My choices. Everyone in the club. I came here because I tried to think of a way that I could escape from that possibility. And I thought maybe if I slept with someone, I wouldn't be wanted anymore and I would be free. Naruto looked off to the side and joked, if you wanted that, maybe you should have tried to sleep with Kiba or fuckface. I'm sure they would have taken the chance. Rias actually giggled at his little joke before she shook her head, they probably would have. But I would have felt lower than scum if I actually did it. Naruto inquired, what is it that's about to change? It doesn't matter now. Rias lowered her head and voice, I can't stop it now without going against my family and everything they are trying to protect. Rias stayed quiet as she thought over her predicament with a solemn atmosphere. Naruto thought for a moment before he held her shoulders and pulled her off him long enough to get his legs out from under her. She looked up at him as he stood up and stepped to the side. You know, that doesn't seem like the stubborn, unwavering type of girl you've been showing me you are for the last few days. But if you want, you could try going with my type of approach. He knelt down and grabbed her shirt before walking back over to her. Rias looked up at him, and what would that be? Naruto draped her open shirt over her shoulders and Rias grabbed the sides to keep her covered. He knelt down in front of her, held her shoulders, and looked in her eyes. You can fight Rias. You can go against what's been planned for you and what's been decided because only you can choose your life. It's hard. It's painful. And you might not even succeed. But you can fight for yourself. And if that's all you can do, then make sure it counts. Rias looked at the whiskered blonde as his words sunk in. Her gloomy expression turned into a small smile and she grabbed his hand, thank you Naruto. Rias looked at the phone on the table, and not a moment too soon. Friday. 0:00. The entire apartment was basked in a bright light that caused the two young adults to squint their eyes. When the light faded, a tall and beautiful woman with braided silver hair in a maid outfit was standing there with her hands placed in front of her. She looked at Rias, Ojo-sama, it's time to go. We need to prepare for tomorrow. While Naruto was still surprised by the busty older woman's entrance, Rias nodded her head and took her friend's hands off her shoulders, of course Grafia. Give me a moment. Rias stood up from the bed and started to collect her things. She placed any of her clothes she had casted off in her bag and picked up her shoes and phone as well. She walked over to the circle and held out her bag, could you hold this for a second? There's one last thing I need to do. Grafia bowed her head, of course Ojo-sama. Rias looked back at the blonde looking up at her from his bed. She walked over to him and knelt down to face him with a smile. Thank you, for clearing my head and stopping me from making a horrible mistake, Naruto. Naruto was a little overwhelmed for a moment before he just joked, is sleeping with me horrible mistake. Rias playfully shook her head, you get what I mean. I don't know what's going to happen after this. Whether it'll be for better or for worse, it's my decision from now on. She raised her hand and gently stroked his cheek, so thank you. She leaned forward and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek before standing back up and walking to her family servant's side. She turned back and waved goodbye to the blonde before she disappeared in a bright light. Naruto was left alone in his room in the dark after the two ladies had vanished. His hand slowly came to his cheek and he felt the small place that Ria's soft and warm lips had kissed him. He sat up against the wall and stared off silently. While his thoughts continued to linger on the crimson-haired girl. Devil. Okay everyone, that's the end of your exams. I hope you all studied appropriately and I'll see you after the break. The class started to exit out of the room as Naruto gathered his things together again. He got up from his chair just in time to see Akino standing in front of him. She motioned out the door, can you come to the club? There's something happening that we need to be present for. I know you said you aren't a member but. Does this have something to do with Rias? Naruto asked. His thought process had continuously gone back to the girl and what had happened last night. Akino just nodded her head. Naruto walked past her, then let's go. As the two classmates walked towards the abandoned school building, Akino spoke, Bucho told me what happened last night. What did she say? Well, other than the fact that you seem to be a very childish study partner that always tries to avoid the subject. She looked up at him, she told me you helped her out a lot last night. Naruto deadpanned, did she mention she left me kinda blue-balled as well? Yes. That too. Akino covered her mouth. I have to admit, that was actually quite amusing. Naruto felt like blowing his top and arguing with the girl, but when he looked to the side, he saw she had a relieved look on her face. Thank you for helping her last night. She hasn't shown it, but this problem has been all she's thinking about for the last week. And despite how we act and argue with each other, I'm very grateful for your help. Thank you, Naruto-san. Naruto noticed the sincerity in her voice and felt his argument just wither out. Akino then aimed a pleasant smile up at him, but if you did actually sleep with Bucho, I don't know what I would have done to you. It would not have been pleasant. Well, not for you at least. Big talk from a girl that can't say no to a study session with Rias. Talk all you want, she already told me you try to avoid the subject like I do. Still get better grades. Still a sadistic witch. Their jabbing ended when they walked into the club room together and happened upon the sight of Rias sitting on the couch with a stern expression and the same silver-haired maid from last night standing behind her. Moments later, Koneko, Kiba, Issei, and Asia entered the room as well. The more veteran members looked at their president in worry as Issei and Isa looked around in confusion. Issei spotted the tall blonde senior and whispered, "Hey, what's going on?" Naruto just shrugged his shoulders, curious about what was happening as well. Asia looked at the expression on Ria's face and worried, "Is Bucho-san okay? She seems distant. She's thinking." Kiba answered. Akino continued, "She's been thinking and preparing for what's about to happen." The moment she said that, everyone's attention was garnered by a large magical circle forming near the door of the room. The sound of sizzling fire and storming wind filled the room as a bright red circle with what looked like a bird in its center appeared. They all looked towards it and Asia nervously asked, what is that?" Koneko narrowed her eyes and responded, "Phonex." And the entire room was engulfed in a blazing hot flame. "Omake. It's a hard knock life for the boy. Okay everyone, it's the end of the week." Sona placed the Kuo Academy suggestion box on the table of the student council room and addressed everyone in the council peerage. "Just before we go off on break, I want to make sure we read through all of these suggestions." Her vice president and queen, Tsubaki Shinra, grabbed the box and dumped its contents on the table. She looked at all the younger members of the council. "Now we can't fulfill each and every desire these students have, but we can at least read through them and respond back. So make sure to take the time and notice every detail. But you guys say it like these are actually suggestions. But every time we actually look inside." Momo Hanakai, one of the bishops, opened up a letter and held it out to the president. "It's usually just fan letters to you. Dear Sauna-sama. If you would, please make me your slave." Sona paid no mind and continued to look through the letters. "Even so, that doesn't mean we can just leave them alone. If we all take a part of the pile we should be able to finish in no time. Is that clear?" "Yes ma'am, X6. The student council started reading through each and every one of the letters. Saji actually took a moment and looked at Sona in amazement. "Wo Kaichu, you have so many admirers. I bet there's a letter here from almost everyone in the school." Sona smiled. "Well, I hope they're content with the work I've done. But we still gave a lot left to do." Tsubasa Yura, the rook with dark blue hair, opened up one letter and was surprised to see it wasn't addressed to either the president or vice president. She looked to the only boy in the room. "Genshiro, this one is addressed to you." Everyone looked in mild surprise as Saji was shocked to hear that. He had a big smile. "Really? Let me see." Tsubasa handed the letter over and Saji immediately opened it. And everyone watched as all the color and life in his face instantly disappeared. Written over the paper, in what Saji could only hope was messy red ink, read as such. "Hello you little fucking shit stain of a human being. If you touch any of the sweet little angels in the student council, I personally promise to come into your house at night and rip your asshole out through your throat." Saji shook in fear before he heard the girls address him. "Hey, I found another one for Gen-chan. Me too. Here's another for Genshiro-senpai." All the notes laid open in front of him and his eyes picked up the keywords. Cunt blasting. Castrated in an open. Left bloody on a road. Squeeze your testicles. Fisted through the urethra. The most terrifying part was that Saji could easily see that some of these notes were written by girls. Sona smiled. "Goodness Saji, you seem to be quite popular, don't you think?" Saji. Saji was cowering in a corner and muttering to himself, I think I might regret taking this position now. Naruto had to cover his eyes as the whole room shined like it was harboring a miniature sun. The light was damn near blinding and the heat felt like they went into a sauna. He tried to open his eyes and could see everyone else in the room wasn't faring any better than him, covering their eyes and coughing at the sensation of ash and steam filling their senses. Everyone except Graphia, who was used to situations like this happening on a daily basis. In Rias, the heat and smoke were affecting her as much as them, but she wasn't going to show weakness in front of her guest. The burning sensation started to dissipate and the light started to fade. When everything settled, the red magic circle had disappeared and left a tall figure standing in its place. The figure was of a tall and slim man wearing a blazer and dressed in a very proper manner. He had medium-length scraggly blonde hair with slight bangs reaching down around his blue eyes. His handsome face looked no older than 20 and he had a confident, relaxed smile. Naruto narrowed his eyes. There was something he just didn't like about this guy. Something fundamental. He opened his eyes again and looked around the room, not paying any mind to the members of the peerage that were glaring holes through him. He continued to look around until his gaze landed on the unamused expression of one Rias Gremory, both her eyes closed as she felt his stare land on her. His confident smile grew and the man stepped forward. Rias Tilda, my dear Tilda, it's been much too long. He placed his elbows on the top of the opposite couch and relaxed his posture. I hope you've missed me just as much as I've missed you. Riser. Rias spoke with neither anger or distaste in her voice, only a stern edge that showed she was in no mood for pleasantries. She opened one eye to look at the pompous smile of her fellow devil. I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't have preferred going a little longer without seeing you again. Oh, there's that wicked tongue I've grown accustomed to. Riser stood up and kept a hand on the couch to lean against. There's no reason to be so spiteful, Rias. Considering our situation, I think it would be for the best if you and I tried to improve our relationship. Rias crossed her arms and legs. Better for you. Not for me. Oh, you jest. Issei felt unnerved by this super confident handsome man that appeared from fire. He leaned in towards Yuto. Hey, what's with this guy? Does he know Bucho or something? Yuto leaned in closer. His name is Riser Phoenix. He's one of the sons to the Phoenix clan, a pure-blooded devil like Bucho and Kaichu-san. Asia titled her head in confusion, Phoenix. Like the bird of myth and legend. Akino continued on, his family has a strong affinity to both flames and wind. But more than anything, their most amazing skill is their regenerative ability. They can heal most any fatal or crippling wound in just a matter of seconds and their lifespans are so long that they're one of the closest things considered to be completely immortal. Issei and Asia looked between each other nervously before gulping. The brown-haired pervert asked, what does that mean? You can't kill these chickens. Koneko stated with a slightly miffed tone as she narrowed her eyes at the man. Riser walked along the side of the couch before sitting on its arm. Now Rias, why can't you and I come to an agreement already? This matter was settled by our families. And even talked about between the mouths. Once it reaches levels like that, I think we are far past the point of arguing about the matter. You're right, our families already decided on this. Rias looked at the blonde devil facing her, but this isn't their decision to make. It's ours. And I've decided against it. Riser rolled his eyes and sighed. Really, Rias, are you that put off by the idea of marrying me? Rias narrowed her eyes. My biggest complaint with this marriage is that it's been decided that I have no say in it. I'm not happy with the idea of having everything decided for me. Being betrothed to you is just rubbing salt in an open wound. Issei and Asia's eyes widened in shock as they looked at the veteran members of the peerage, getting nods that the news was real. Naruto narrowed his eyes, understanding now what Rias meant last night when she said her decisions were being made for her. Riser sighed and shook his head patronizingly before looking at the crimson-haired beauty. Rias, you and I, we are pure-blooded devils. Some of the few left that can still do something to help our species. The devils, they're being overrun by low-class and resurrected peons, leaving us as the minority. He held a hand to his chest before looking at the young woman. Our nobility is going to go extinct soon if we don't do something about it. Rias just stayed composed. I know the issue, Riser. If you want to convince me, please stop talking to me like I'm a child. Riser placed himself in the couch and sat forward. If two of the remaining pillar households joined together like ours, it would be in the best interest of devils everywhere. Pure bloods could still hold influence and power over the lesser devils. We can still hold our standing if we marry together. Can't you imagine it? Yes, I can, Riser. Rias shook her head, but I have no interest in forcing people to follow me just because of my status. I'm not so invested in stroking my pride like you are. Riser sighed and shook his head before smiling. Rias, whatever your feelings are to the issue, we both know it's too late. Going back on this wedding would be like spitting in the face of both of our households and the four great Mao. And I'm sure you wouldn't want to disappoint them. Rias' peerage all had varying looks on their faces as Riser continued to speak in a haughty tone. But they all had the same feeling of displeasure and uneasiness from listening to this man talk so patronizingly to their king. Riser stood up out of his spot and sat beside his fiancée, Rias not showing any change in figure or emotion when he got so close. Riser spoke softly, "Look, I know you may not like this situation, but I promise you that this will all be worth it. This world is full of dangerous things trying to kill us, but if you stay with me then I will protect you from all of them. All the fallen angels and their devious little schemes at trying to dominate the world. All the angels and their silly, blind followers that jump at the chance to obey their orders. I will protect you from all of them." Riser reached around and placed his arm around her shoulders, eliciting several bad looks from the members of the orc. He smiled. "You will be treated like a queen. Like a goddess. You'll never have to work another day in your life. You'll have servants working for you at every beck and call. You can live your dream life. Just become mine." Riser started reaching out so he could run his hand over her thigh. Until a hand shot down between them and grabbed his wrist. Rias, Riser, and the other orc members all looked in surprise at the sudden action from the unexpected source. The two pure bloods looked up to see the whiskered man reaching between them to stop the immortal's hand. Riser blinked before looking down at where his advance had been prematurely stopped. He looked up at the fellow blonde and asked, "What do you think you're doing?" Naruto didn't look at him. "Sorry. It just seemed like you were making a quick advance on someone who didn't like it." Riser looked at the stranger in confusion before he just started chuckling. He sighed contentedly before staring up at the intruder. "That's very heroic of you, but Rias is my fiancé. We can do whatever we want with each other. It's one of the perks about being betrothed to one another. I'm sure you must think that's very romantic." Naruto looked towards Riser and glared, "But it would be more meaningful if you didn't look at her like an object to be won." Riser's easygoing smile slowly started to fade until it became a straight line. The two blondes continued to glare at each other as neither was taking the chance to move. Riser looked down for a moment before looking back at Naruto and smirking. His sleeves started to turn orange and red and the upper portion started being engulfed in flames. It slowly started to creep towards the gripping hand but Naruto made no effort to let go or back off. "Riser." Rias spoke firmly while looking at the Fennec's son, "Stop acting childish. There's no reason to try and assert your dominance at every chance you take. It's obnoxious." Riser rolled his eyes and receded his flames before Rias turned to look at her friend. "Naruto, please let go of him." Naruto looked into Rias' eyes and saw a firm confidence in her sea foam orbs. He slowly let go of Riser's wrist before taking a few steps back to his original spot. He looked to the side to see each of the orc members giving him grateful looks. Asia was smiling happily as Issei sent him a thumbs up at his blocking. Yuto and Koneko both sent him a quick nod, the former smiling while the freshman still looked stoic. Even Akino had a softer smile while sent him a thankful nod. Riser stood out of his seat and walked over to sit on the other couch before his eyes fell on the people standing behind his fiancée. He smiled coyly. "It seems like you added a few new people into your ranks since I last saw you. Of course, there's your lovely queen, your young knight, and little rook. But I don't remember that blonde girl or this angry boy glaring at me. And of course I'm sure that little hooligan by your side is a new addition as well. I've met some rather interesting people in the last few weeks." Riser hummed before smiling. "Well, if you invited your peerage to our little meeting, it would only make sense if I do the same." Riser snapped his fingers and a large magic circle with the Fennec's crest appeared behind his seat. A quick burst of fire and wind revealed a group of 14 different and diverse women. Some were younger. Some were older. Some were wearing clothes of a different period. Some were wearing fetish appeal outfits. One thing was for certain though. This guy had used his evil pieces to create a harem of beautiful women. Riser sat back and smiled. There. Now the gang's all here. Rias narrowed her eyes slightly. Sniff you oohoo. Rias' composed manner faltered when she heard the sniffles and sobbing happening behind her. She looked over her shoulder to see Issei with powerful streams of tears cascading down his cheeks. Everyone on her side except Asia were looking at him with blank and unamused stares. Asia was worried. Issei-san. What's wrong? Are you okay? He did it. Huh. Issei gripped the top of the couch to hold himself up. He's got a super shitty personality and I want to hit his stupid handsome face. But he made a harem of gorgeous women. He's fulfilled my dream. I want to be angry but I can only respect his tastes and cry that this is truly a reality we can achieve. Issei fell behind the couch and started wailing in both sadness and joy, everyone on the Gremory side just staring down at him as he sobbed. Riser and his peerage were all confused by what was happening. Riser leaned forward. Is he okay? Rias just rubbed the bridge of her nose. Just forget it. It's not important. Riser decided to go back to the matter at hand. You're right, but this is just going to appear childish if you throw a tantrum like this, Rias. Our families have agreed unanimously on the matter. Trying to break it off now. He smiled challengingly, would incur the wrath of my family. And we wouldn't want that. Please. Riser looked up to see Asia beg with a sorrowful look in her eyes. Bucho-san wants to talk with you about this. Can't you find it in your heart to listen to her? Riser looked at the nun before cackling loudly. He continued and Asia shrunk back a bit before he wiped a tear from his eye. That's adorable that you want to try so hard to help your king, but this is not a matter a resurrected devil should stick their unwanted attention in. Asia cowered a little and Akino wrapped an arm around her to calm her down. Issei saw Asia whimpering and he popped back up with a furious scowl. You ass. Bucho obviously doesn't want to be with you. Can't you take a hint and piss off? Members of Riser's peerage started to glare and grip their fists but Riser paid no mind. Once again, I'm not here to take advice or criticisms from some freshwater brat that doesn't understand what's happening around them. Issei snarled in anger. Don't bother. Issei stopped and looked behind him to see Naruto standing with narrowed eyes. He looked at Issei. You can try as much as you want to reason or threaten him, but it won't do shit. Guys like this, growing up entitled to privilege and with so much pride up their asses they're almost overflowing, can't realize just how unwanted and disgusting they are to other people. Slam. Naruto's head was smashed into the wall behind them as a staff struck his face. The members of the orc looked on in shock as a young girl with blue twin tails glared at the taller blonde she attacked. She gripped her staff. Don't you dare talk so slanderously about Riser-sama, you filth. She felt some resistance against her staff and was shocked to see Naruto had grabbed the tip before it hit him. He gritted his teeth before tossing the strike aside and grabbing the girl's throat, causing her to gasp in fright. Immediately, a woman in a Chinese gown and another in knight's armor lunged forward to attack the blonde man. But Yuto dashed in front of them and blocked their attacks with two blades. Asia gasped before Issei stood up in front of her with his red gauntlet at the ready. Asia, stay behind me. Several members of Riser's peerage started summoning magic to attack with. Akino smiled before her hands started to crackle with lighting running up her arms. Two sets of twins jumped onto the table between the couches, brandishing chainsaws and kitten gloves to fight with. Koneko effortlessly lifted the mahogany desk over her head to attack with. The two groups were ready to battle at a moment's notice. Rias and Ria are still sitting peacefully in their spots. They all looked towards the pretty silver-haired maid that had been standing off to the side this entire time. She held her hands together in front of her and spoke in a calm tone. Now that the pleasantries have been shared, I'd like it if you all calmed down and returned to your spots. Please. There was a beat of silence before everyone started calming down and returning to their positions. The maid took a step forward. My name is Grafia. I am a servant of the Gremory household and I was asked here to be the moderator between Ojo-sama and Riser-sama. The matter of engagement between the Gremory household and Koneko household has been long discussed between both families. But the next head of the Gremory household, Rias Ajosama, has argued that this marriage agreement should be null and void. After much delegation, Grafia turned to her redhead mistress. Ojo-sama has issued a challenge for the final decision on the matter. They all looked to the heiress as she stood out of her seat. Riser, I challenge you to a rating game. Riser and his peerage were shocked for a moment after Rias had challenged them to their society's best-known form of resolve. The Koneko head stifled a laugh as the members of his peerage giggled. A rating game. Really? Are you sure? If I win, the marriage, ceremony, and all related discussions are out to rest. We will no longer be betrothed to each other and there will be no feuds between our houses. Rias rested a hand on her chest. If I lose, I will stop fighting. I will marry you without another argument. Riser's laugh started to die out. This is the way you want to handle this. Considering I've gone through several rating games and you haven't even performed in one, I thought you would have chosen a more suitable challenge to give yourself a handicap. If you're so sure you won't lose, then stop stalling. A look of displeasure crossed his face for a moment before he smiled. Very well, Rias, if this is how you want to settle this matter then I'll agree to it. I accept your challenge. Grafia nodded her head. The challenge has been accepted. Rias Gremory-sama of the Gremory clan and Riser Koneko-sama of the Koneko clan shall participate in a rating game to determine the fate of this matter. The date and details for this rating game will be decided by a third party at the most available time. Riser stood out of his seat and walked back towards his peerage. I'm sure this will all be taken care of once your little group of misfits faces off against my peerage. I can't wait to see how that turns out for you. I regret to inform you but not everyone in Ojo-sama's peerage will be able to attend the rating game. Riser and his peerage were intrigued by what the maid said, while Rias and the orc were confused by what she meant. Rias looked behind at her family servant. What do you mean? Grafia turned slightly and looked towards the whiskered blonde standing at the end of the group. This caught his attention while she looked directly at him. Due to extraneous circumstances, Naruto Uzumaki-sama may not be allowed to participate in the rating game, as he can be considered an illegal piece under Ojo-sama's charge. The members of the orc looked at her in shock as Naruto blinked in confusion. While the rest of them were dumbfounded, Issei took a step forward. That's bullshit. Sure, he's stubborn as a mule about joining, but Naruto-senpai is still one of us. He should be allowed to participate too. Yuto nodded. I agree with Issei-kun. Naruto-san is one of us. He should be allowed to fight alongside us as well. Koneko and Asia nodded their heads in agreement while Akino looked over at the blonde in question as he stood there silently. Grafia gave a small nod. I understand your feelings, but this is a topic that would be under much debate. Let him join. They all looked towards Riser as he stood confidently with a hand on his side. If he's a part of Rias' peerage then that's all that matters. Not like he'll be able to change the outcome any more than if he wasn't involved. Grafia stood there for a moment before bowing her head. Very well, we will discuss this decision as the rules are being made for the rating game. Anything else that should be addressed? Yes. Since I'm accepting the challenge, do you mind if I pick the location of the fight? Riser asked Grafia before sending a look towards Rias. The silver-haired maid turned to the club president as she nodded her head. I'm fine with that. Good. Then how about? Riser smiled. The city. Or at least a few blocks of it. I always enjoy viewing the tall buildings and infrastructure of the human world. It's quite the sight. Rias narrowed her eyes as Grafia turned to the Koneko boy. Very well. The location has been chosen. I will contact both families when the rules and date for the rating game have been set up. Until then. A magic circle appeared under her and she disappeared in the light. Another magic circle appeared beneath Riser and his peerage and he sent a small wave to his fiancée. Until then. And like that, they vanished. The only people sitting in the room while the sun set outside were the resident Kuo students. Rias stayed seated while her brain processed everything that had been discussed just a few moments earlier. The members of the peerage were thinking intensely and bottling up their worry. And Naruto just stood there, staring forward with a glare and not moving an inch. Devil. Ding. Naruto opened his eyes and sat up in his bed. With a grunt he stood back up and walked over to his little kitchen. He turned off the timer and opened up the cup of instant ramen he had made himself for dinner. He grabbed his meal, along with a small plate of veggies, and sat down at his table before digging in. He wasn't focused though. His thoughts always went back to what had happened in the club just a few hours ago. After the meeting was over, Rias stood out of her seat and told everyone that they would have to start training the next day, but that they were dismissed for now. When the rest of them left and Naruto was the last person to leave, the crimson-haired woman took a moment to thank him for coming there today. And when he asked if he was going to participate in this fight of theirs. It's your choice, Naruto. It's not my decision to force on you. You can come train if you want, but we won't know if you can even participate until Grafia returns. Naruto continued to eat his meal before he noticed something. He moved his arm and pulled his sleeve down. Faint scars along his forearm. From where Danasek's attack had destroyed a fire hydrant and the metal had pierced his arms. He had been injured because he hadn't fought a real opponent in so long. And then Riser's smug face flashed in front of him. Not like he'll be able to change the outcome any more than if he wasn't involved. Slam. Naruto's hands slammed against his table and his bowl and plate shook. His hair covered his eyes before he snarled his teeth. He stood up out of his seat and opened the door before slamming it behind him. Naruto stomped down the stairs before standing in the middle of the street. He looked around him before facing towards the center of the city, taking note that no one was in sight. He rolled his shoulders and got down into a running stance and prepared for run. Naruto dashed off the concrete and sped down the street as fast as possible. Even at this speed, he was faster than most people. He stayed agile, vaulting over dumpsters and clearing any obstacles that obstructed his path. But it wasn't enough. He used to be more. He used to be able to do so much. But now he was different. He was impaired. Yet that wasn't enough. He didn't care if he wasn't as strong as he used to be. It didn't matter to those fallen angels that attacked him what he used to be able to do, and it shouldn't matter to him now. He could do something. He knew it. All he had to do was find it and. Naruto stopped running and was panting madly, a faint gust of wind following after him. His eyes widened and he looked behind him to see the entirety of the town and city in his sights. How did he do that? Naruto had been thinking while he ran, but not too much time should have passed since he started. Yet he somehow reached the city limits from his shabby little apartment without even realizing it. Naruto looked down at his hand and body, realizing that he had already regained his breath and could still go on for more. Something was happening. Naruto looked back and exhaled before running back towards the city, becoming a blur that stirred up a gust behind him. Devil! Order up! Naruto came rushing to the counter and picked up the 3 new bowls of ramen ready to serve. He balanced them on his arms before swiftly turning around and served the tables. It was halfway through Golden Week now, and with it being the holidays, the usually empty shop was filled with people looking for a tasty meal. Miyamoto continued working on the ramen as Naruto dropped off some empty bowls. The older man laughed. Business is boomin', right? Naruto groaned. There's never this many people in one day. What the hell is going on? People are on break, kid. It's a holiday. They don't want to stay in their homes where they'll have to cook their own meals. They wanna go out, celebrate, and probably grab some quick stuff before going out again. Naruto looked over at the cook, so we're basically a pit stop so they can get some energy again. Miyamoto nodded. That's the short of it. Naruto rolled his eyes before curling his sleeves and starting to scrub the dishes. Miyamoto took a moment from cooking and looked back at his young employee. What's Rias-san and her friends doing for Golden Week? They haven't contacted you or anything. Naruto continued washing the dirty dishes. They're busy with something important. I doubt they could spare any time even if they wanted to. Most people can't see it because they're distracted by how pretty she is, but that demon woman is crazy stubborn and way too energetic. But she ain't that bad to look at. Don't even think about it, Gramps. If you were 20 years younger and she were 20 years older, there'd still be too big an age gap. Miyamoto's eye twitched. How old do you think I am? I'm 54. Oh. He shrugged his shoulders, then it'd still be weird because you're so damn fugly. Naruto felt a swift kick to his spine from the angered older man. Naruto-san. Naruto lifted himself back up while rubbing his tailbone to see Asia running in with a happy look on her face and a bag in her arms. Some of the customers and people passing by noticed the pretty blonde nun run into the ramen shop. She came up to the counter. I recognized the cute little mascot outside. I'm so glad you're okay. Asia. What are you doing here? I was getting some supplies for our training. Miyamoto raised an eyebrow. Training. Naruto realized that the innocent maiden might reveal something sensitive and spun her around. He started leading them out the door. Gramps. Taking my break. Naruto led Asia around the corner and into the alleyway. He walked in front of the younger girl and sighed. Rias said you guys were gonna train or something, right? Why are you still here? That's because we're going to be fighting in the city. Asia looked up at the taller blonde. Bucho-san said that the best way for us to train is by growing accustomed to the battleground. We spend the day learning strategies and the nights with physical conditioning. Naruto looked off to the side and was actually pretty surprised by that way of thinking. Until it was determined how big the battleground would be, they had an entire city to learn and train in. Asia looked down at her feet embarrassingly, although I'm not really doing the physical training. Bucho-san said that it would be a better use of my time to train my magic and demonic power. She held her hands up and a ball of light formed between her palms. Akeno-san tells me I have a great aptitude to magic powers since I am a bishop now, so I should probably be staying defensive in a fight. That's probably a good idea. No offense to the nun, but she did not seem to shine brightest in a fight. She was kind, heartfelt, caring, and did not want to hurt anyone. Plus she could heal anyone from most severe injuries. Those were definitely the marks of a medic, not a fighter. But Issei-san is picking up very quickly with the fighting and training. Asia spoke with energy and joy in her voice. He spends everyday training for hours. He spars with Kiba-san every day in the school gym. And he fights with Koneko-chan to help with his strength. And he's learning to use his power with me, but he isn't so good at that part yet. But he's getting better. Naruto nodded before looking at the bag she was carrying. He inquired, what's that? Oh. She started rummaging through the contents of her bag. These are some things I had to go shopping for today. Some potatoes. Some onions. Noodles. Rice. Underwear. Gym clothes. Swimsuits. Wait, what? And I wanted to grab these too. Asia rested the bag on the ground before pulling out two objects. A glass bottle with a cork, filled with water and with a cross on the front, and a small black leather book with a similar cross. Issei-san doesn't know much about devil weaknesses, so I thought I'd show him these. Some holy water and the Holy Bible. Naruto tilted his head before taking the glass bottle from her hand. He looked it over. We're weak to water. Very special water. Water blessed and purified by a holy priest. It's harmless to humans, but to devils, it can be very painful. She looked up at him. It's kind of like an acid made specifically for devils. And it's very dangerous. Naruto hummed before he looked at the book in her hands, and the book. This is the Holy Bible. The book that contains all of the teachings and trials the Lord and His apostles passed down to us. It is the book that teaches us how to care for each other, and how we can reach true salvation for our next life. Asia had a dreamy expression as she hugged the black book closer to her chest. I remember reading scripture every night before I went to bed. It was so beautiful and calming. Here, let me read you some. She opened the book in excitement before finding a passage she was very fond of, and we know that in all things God. Both blondes felt a spike of agony pierce through their heads. Asia struggled but continued to read. God works for the good of those who love Him. Another spike. Another groan and moan of pain. Asia willed herself, who have been called. Naruto's hands flew forward and slammed the book shut. His eye twitched. Asia. Stop reading from the book of pain. Asia stuttered, sorry. Force of habit. Naruto stood up straight and rubbed his head to relieve the migraine settling in. Bucho-san's friends haven't come to a decision yet. Naruto looked back at Asia, huh? The decision about if you can be in the game or not. Bucho-san has been called away a few times to address the matter, but there hasn't been any answer yet. Asia fiddled with her fingers. I'm sorry. I don't see why you're apologizing. It's not like it's your fault this is all happening. He ran his hand over his face and sighed. It'd probably hinder all your work if I was a part of it now anyway. Asia shook her head. I don't think so. Not at all. She smiled warmly at him. I think everyone would be very happy to have you by our side. I feel safe with you, Naruto-san. You can make people feel stronger by their side. Naruto was silent as Asia picking up the supplies in her bag. The whiskered blonde looked at the bottle in his hand and asked, Can I hold on to this? Asia nodded. Of course you can. She started running out the alley and back home before she turned around and bowed to the older man. I'll see you later, Naruto-san. Wish us luck. Asia ran around the corner and out of sight as Naruto stayed in place with a small smile before turning the bottle in his hand. This was lethal stuff, huh? Devil. It was Saturday night. Really late. Almost midnight. He hadn't heard word from Rias or anyone from the orcs since Asia came to see him a few days earlier. Tomorrow was Sunday and the last day of Golden Week. Naruto was making his way back to his apartment. His white shirt stained with sweat and his hair matted after a long workout. And by long he meant an entire day, from rise to set, alone to test himself. He got a day off from working at the ramen shop and he didn't know what else to do with his time. So he decided to follow up on the trend he'd been following that week and spend some time pushing himself. He did the same from every night after he was done working at his job and would just test his abilities. Running, jumping, reaction, strength, speed, stamina, endurance. They had all gradually started to increase as Naruto trained. But they didn't change at a normal rate. They were changing into superhuman traits after just a few days of practice. Something that was impossible without years of intense and hellish training. He still got tired but not after a long period of training and work. He didn't know why this was happening. But he didn't care. Naruto walked up the stairs of the crummy apartment complex and started walking towards his room. He pulled out his key but stopped when he saw what was waiting outside his door. Sitting against the door with a file in her lap while she stared up at the sky was a certain crimson-haired devil. The glasses resting on her nose were reflecting the light from the moon above as she was completely distracted by the majestic beauty of the jewel in the sky. I've never seen you look so calm. Usually you're moving or trying to get something done. Rias looked over and saw Naruto standing over her. A calm smile grew over her face. What in the world could you possibly have been doing to get so sweaty? I was sitting around and realized that I felt bloated so I went out for a little jog. He walked over before sliding against the door and sitting beside her. Have you been waiting long? Yes, actually, I have. She gave him a cute little scowl. I came here 2 hours ago to talk to you and you weren't even here. It's rude to not even be home when you have an important guest waiting. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. Well, you didn't tell me you were coming so I couldn't be here to meet you. So if anything we're both at fault. She pouted. You smell. What are you doing here, Rias? She patted the file in her lap. I've been reading this thing for several days now. Height of the buildings around us. Structural integrity. Weak points. Roots. All in hope of helping everyone else prepare for the worst tomorrow. Naruto took a deep breath. So it's all going down tomorrow. 6 in the morning. The intersection on the edge of the city. Rias sighed and grumbled while looking down at the file. I didn't give Riser enough credit. To those looking on the outside, his gesture of giving us time and choosing a location looks like he was being cocky. But in his own way it's a psychological strategy. Naruto tilted his head. How? The longer I have to stew in my thoughts, the more worried I feel about this game. And with such a large location, a first-time participant is going to have a harder time fighting against someone with experience. Naruto's eyes widened before he whistled. Wow. Gotta give that jackass credit. That's a pretty good idea. Yes. It was. Rias scratched her head. And you're right too, he is a jackass. Naruto patted her back sympathetically as she moaned in displeasure. He sat back into the door. So why did you come to see me? Rias brought her hands out of her hair and clasped them together. The committee finally made a ruling on your participation in the raiding game. There was a lot of arguing because of your status as an illegal piece, but Riser got his family to pull some strings, and they decided to leave the decision to me. Fat lot of good that is when the game is tomorrow, but politics rarely get done in the favor of time. Naruto looked at her. So what's your decision? My decision. She looked towards him. Is that it's your choice, Naruto? This isn't your fight to suffer through. You did more than enough helping me find the courage to make it this far. I'm not going to force you to do anything if you don't want to. She smiled. That's something I've learned about you over the weeks. Naruto stared at her for a moment before he nodded. Thank you. No problem. He smirked, but you do realize that tomorrow's the cutoff date, right? For trying to convince me to join the club. Looks like I'll win after all. Rias just sunk down a little further and groaned. It's too much to try and juggle this fight with Riser and your impossible stubbornness at once. Since this fight decides if I'm gonna marry that jerk or not, I'm pretty sure it's understandable that I've been preoccupied for the last few days. Naruto's smile fell. Do you think you'll be ready? Rias sighed before looking back up at the sky. I'm nervous. And scared. We've done all we could. We've trained. Prepared ourselves. All that's left is to hope for the best. I want to win so that my future won't be decided for me, but if I get the chance. She grinned at her whiskered friend. I wanna teach that jerk a few things about manners. Naruto noticed the calm in her voice and eyes. You don't seem so nervous for someone deciding their future in a few hours. Rias leaned her head back and looked up at the sky. I've never taken a moment just to look up at the sky. It should be obvious that it's a beautiful sight, but when you actually just stare at it, it's unbelievable. You feel so big and yet so small at the same time. And when you realize that, all your worries just start to disappear. While Rias looked up at the sky, Naruto just stared at the king, silently. She was smart, knowledgeable, but she wasn't wise to the world. She was scared to fight in the game tomorrow, but she also knew that it was necessary. She had experienced everything while being led by someone else and never being able to live life for herself. In that regard, she was like a little girl that wanted to see the whole world for fun. There was something pure about her desire. Rias stood back up with a groan before she smiled down at Naruto. I'll see you soon, Naruto. Wish me luck. She started walking down the steps and into the street back home. Naruto sat there, left alone by the Crimson Beauty a second time as he looked up at the moon. She was right. It was peaceful. Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He let the peace and tranquility of the night wash over him. And he felt something stir. Something he hadn't felt in ages. Rias was walking down the street when she felt a massive burst of energy reach her senses. She spun around and looked to try and pinpoint the odd power, but it disappeared just as quickly. She stood there in bewilderment before slowly turning back around and heading back home. Devil. Asterisk ya www asterisk. Koneko yawned before rubbing the sand out of her eyes. Koneko-chan, are you okay? You seem tired. Asia said worryingly as she looked at the petite freshman. I'm fine, Asia-senpai. Koneko said before shaking her head. I just don't like waking up so early in the morning. I agree. This sucks. Issei spoke lethargically, still tired from working himself to the bone for more than a week. He looked up at their leader. Bucho, couldn't you have tried to get this thing set up a little later? Maybe when the sun actually started to rise. Sorry Issei, but it was the committee's choice when to hold the match. Rias was walking in circles as she prepared herself for the match. Sona was on the committee for communications, but if you want anyone to complain to, you can go to her. Issei shook his head. No thank you. I'm pretty sure Saji would tear me a new one if I even tried complaining to Kaichu. Rias laughed. I guess you're right. Yuto fastened his sword to his side before looking over at his worried king. He walked up to her side and held her shoulder. It's okay, Bucho. There's no reason to be worried. Rias looked at her. Knight, what? I'm not worried. Do I seem worried? Yes. Yes you do. Yep. Why you do seem a little panicked. Totally swamped. Rias looked at her peerage dryly. Well, thanks for the vote of confidence, everyone. Akino came over to her friend's side and ran a hand over her back. You can trust us. I promise you we will win this. Rias looked up at her oldest friend as she gave her an assuring smile. She looked around to see the rest of her team give her the same smile. Are we ready? 6 of us against that prick's whole harem. Issei grinned. I bet we can handle it. No. They all looked at Koneko as she disagreed before pointing behind them. 7. They looked back to see Naruto standing with them, dressed in his school uniform like the rest of them and a hand in his pocket. His knife secured between his belt and a small smile on his face. Naruto saw their happily surprised faces and he shrugged, since I was the one that pushed you to do this match, I should be here to help you through it. Rias nodded her head, I knew you'd come. Why's that? Because I trust you. Issei came up to the blonde and punched his shoulder, you gonna be able to handle fighting with us. We got a whole lot stronger since the stuff at the church. Oh. Naruto punched Issei's shoulder in return, making the pervert yelp and tumble over at the strength in his fist, don't worry about me fuckface. I can take care of myself. Koneko walked up behind him and smacked him on the back, which from the little freshman was no different than getting smacked in the spine with a metal bat. He looked back and she nodded at him with a grateful smile. They all went silent as a massive Gremory magic circle appeared beneath them. They all stood apart as the circle glowed brighter and brighter. Rias narrowed her eyes, it's time. There was an unsettling, eerie silence over the artificial space of the city created for the raiding game. Moments ago they were standing in a bustling city corner filled with people going to their early jobs and cars honking while they drove through the street. And in a flash of light that all disappeared, leaving only a few empty cars in the streets and buildings filled with vacant space. It was like being in a ghost town. A group of several young ladies were making their way through the silent city street on the other side of the field in search of their opponents, the Gremory group. But so far they had come up empty in their search. A young girl carrying a wooden staff with bright blue hair wearing a white haori and red obi looked around hesitantly. She continued searching before asking the others in her group, do you think it is odd that we have not spotted head nor tail of any of Rias-sama's peerage yet? Surely we should have seen one of them by now. Don't get paranoid, Mira, that's the downfall of any warrior on the battlefield. Cyrus, Riser's knight that secured a large Zweihander on her back, reassured the pawn as she led her group through the silent city. She continued her diligent surveying of the area and spoke over her shoulder, keep on your guard, all of you. We do not know what this group will do in their attempt to secure victory against Riser-sama. Among Cyrus' group was Mira the Pond Ni and Li the twin pawns dressed like cats, the Rook Shuailin in a Chinese garb, and a kimono-wearing bishop by the name of Mahai. This party was just one group from the entirety of Riser Phoenix's peerage, that had split up to cover more ground as they tried to find their enemies and realize their goal. Destroy them. Tap 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 tap. A metallic tapping could be heard through the area as the girls of the Phoenix group all jumped into their battle stances. They looked around cautiously for the origin of the strange noise before they spotted the perpetrator in question. Sitting on top of one of the empty cars in the street was the blonde man with whiskers they had seen insult Riser in the club a few days earlier. He was staring up at the purple sky as he leaned back on one hand and tapped his sheathed knife against the roof of the car with the other. He continued tapping his knife while inquiring to his opponents with honest surprise, so is this all really just a copy of the city made for this fight? It feels so real. I gotta hand it to the devils, when they want something they go all out for it. Cyrus lowered her weapon but kept her firm glare on the lackadaisical blonde. What are you doing just sitting around during a raiding game? Are you not the least bit threatened by the concept of fighting our group? It's not that. Naruto looked around a little while the sound of his knife against the roof continued right beside him. He shrugged his shoulders, I just wanted to get a moment of peace and silence from all the rambling and planning so I came out here. I just sorta lost track of time and now you guys are here. Big mistake on my part, one guess. Despite his words, his tone and lack of interest in their group showed that he was not in the least bit pressed by the fact that his enemies had arrived in front of him and were ready to attack. Shuailin grew infuriated at his attitude and shouted, are you taking us, the members of Riser-sama's peerage, lightly? As a pawn, we know what your abilities entitle. We are in the other half of the city, which means that our pawns are capable of using promotion, while you have severely crippled your battle prowess by foolishly heading us off like this into your territory. Naruto looked up as he gave some thought to her words before clicking his teeth, meh. I'm not so sure I wanna get into another situation where I try using that upgrade thing and getting screwed by it. Whether you believe it or not, you are at a great disadvantage here. Cyrus lifted her massive blade as the others in her group got into their fighting forms and faced the resting blonde. Cyrus pointed her blade at him. Do you believe that you can beat 3 pawns, 8 rook bishop, and 8 knight, all by yourself? Naruto looked towards them. No. He stopped tapping his knife against the hood and smiled. I just had to wait for the perfect moment. Ga. Ak. Ah. Cyrus looked back to see the girl with white hair from the Gremory group standing between the pawn, twins and bishop, as she had snuck up behind them and landed devastating strikes to their unguarded form. As the bishop fell over unconscious, Koneko jumped over her and sent a hook kick into Xuelin's head that knocked her further down the street. As Koneko landed into her battle stance, the bishop's body shined before she disappeared and a disembodied voice rang over the battle area. Combatant Riser Phoenix's bishop retired. Cyrus' eyes widened and she pulled her blade up to attack the short girl before she heard another yelp of pain besides her. Naruto had dashed in from the side and slammed into Myra's side to knock her over before pulling out his knife and aiming for the knight's face. Cyrus blocked the knife with the hilt of her sword and swung it out at the blonde just as he fell backwards and used his hands to bounce off the ground and away from danger. Naruto flipped back up to his feet as Koneko ducked out of her dangerous situation and came running towards his side. Once they were together, they stood beside each other and got into different stances in preparation of fighting the larger group. Cyrus held her blade up as Mira lifted herself back to her feet. Xuelin pushed off the ground and into a Kenpo stance, and Nian Li jumped back up while meowing angrily. The numerous members of the Phoenix group glared at the duo of the tall blonde male and petite albino girl. The larger group narrowed their eyes before one of them spoke. That was a clever plan to get us to lower our guard by engaging us in meaningless conversation. And you made it seem like the tapping of your knife was just an unconscious gesture, but you were using it as a mechanism to decide when best to strike us. You have my regards in being able to retire one of us so quickly in the game. But if you believe that the two of you will be able to defeat the rest of us by yourselves, then you are greatly. Naruto and Koneko did not stick around for the rest of their speech as they sprinted to the side and ran into an empty office building. The members of Riser's peerage just stared in blank shock at the sudden retreat of their enemies before looking between each other. They ran into the office building to catch them. When they ran inside, they were met with an entire floor filled with office cubicles, desks, chairs, computers, and all other forms of supplies in a regular white-collar workspace with several pillars around the floor. The girls slowly advanced through the silent space as they tried to notice the presence of one of the two enemies. A computer came flying in from the side and broke against one of the twins' heads. They looked and spotted a flurry of white hair before it ducked behind a desk and out of their sight. They were going to attack in that direction, but a chair came flying in from the opposite side and knocked Xuelin off her feet before Naruto disappeared again. From every direction, one of the two members started popping up from behind a desk and throwing everything they could find as hard as they could throw at the varied group of fighters. The Phoenix group could only guard their faces as coffee mugs, keyboards, chairs, computers, and other objects came flying at them. Enough. Cyrus lifted her Zweihander up before giving it a mighty swing and causing a massive gust of wind to spread over the entire office. The shockwave from her swipe obliterated the cubicles and desks, reducing them to timber and broken plastic. Naruto and Koneko climbed over the cubicles and jumped over the wave of wind before they were caught in its destruction. As the two members of the Gremory group landed back on the ground, Koneko had to raise her guard as Xuelin came dashing in with a powerful fist as retribution for the white-haired girl's surprise attack earlier. Koneko was blasted through a pillar before she kept a firm stance and started blocking and parrying the other rook's barrage of strikes and fists. They started matching fist for fist as each clash of attacks caused an echo to reverberate as their iron strikes crossed. Koneko would guard and parry the other girl's swift moves before grabbing her fist and swiping her gloved hands at the taller girl's face. But the Kenpo fighter leaned back before throwing her leg up as high as she could and scrapping against Kaneko's chin enough to push her back. The two rooks glared at each other before stepping forward to continue their skirmish. On the other side of the floor, Naruto was blocking and evading the swipes of the two cat pawns as they attacked him on both sides. The twins would attempt to strike him simultaneously, but Naruto blocked their attacks with his forearms. He pushed them back and parried a punch from the left as he raised his leg to block a kick from the right. When Ni was reeling back for a hook, Naruto threw both his arms into a block against her arm and knocked her back. He then spun around and caught Lee's leg before spinning around and slamming her into her sister's chest. He then leaned back as Mira came dashing in and tried clocking him in the chin with her staff. He slid back and into a back stance as he reached for his knife and pulled it out and turned it in his hand. Mira lunged forward with her staff and Naruto parried with his knife. She made several powerful thrusts immediately after, but Naruto blocked and avoided them without much hassle. She twirled her staff and held it behind her back to catch him off guard with a surprise attack, but Naruto fell forward and out of its path. While he fell, he spun around with his knife outstretched and made a cut against the smaller girl's cheek before he jumped away. The two fighters stood apart from each other before Mira's eyes widened and she held the smoking cut in pain. Ah. Ah. While Mira screamed in pain holding the small cut, Naruto looked over to see Cyrus standing off to the side watching him with a focused eye. He turned around and pushed through a door leading to the stairs. The knight looked over to see Ni and Lee lift themselves up and look towards Koneko. They decided to join Xuelin in her fight against the small rook as Cyrus ran over to Mira's side. She looked over the younger girl before she looked towards the door and gave chase to the whiskered blonde. Naruto ran up several stories of stairs before running out onto the roof. He looked around to try and find a route to escape through in case he had to move. He was seriously considering whether he should pull out the trump card but decided against it when he didn't even know how long it would last. Or whether it would even work if he tried. The door slammed open and Cyrus came out with a furious glare at the tall blonde. She slowly walked out and pulled her massive sword off her back before gripping it with both hands and walking forward. Naruto turned around and faced her as he walked along the gravel, the two people circling around each other patiently. Cyrus kept a firm stare on him and stated, "You come across as incompetent and reckless, but in a dire situation you turn pragmatic and unpredictable. You, are a very strange individual." Naruto shrugged, "I get that a lot." Cyrus dashed forward and swung her blade out to cut the man, but Naruto jumped and flipped over her blade. He gripped his knife and slid in to cut her, but the knight pulled her sword back in time and nearly cut through the blonde. She continued to swipe her sword at Naruto as much as possible, but he skillfully dodged getting caught by her attack. Naruto swiped his knife at her face and caused her to stumble back. He followed up by sending jabs and crosses at her head that made her lean away for safety. She had to guard against a side kick that caused her to stumble and nearly fall back before she found her footing again. She had no time to breathe as he charged in and sent a jumping knee at her that impacted against her Zweihander and caused her to skid over the roof. She looked down in shock to see that his knee strike had cracked the center of her giant sword. She looked back up and saw that he had covered the distance between them in an instant and was bringing his knee down towards her. Cyrus reacted and grabbed the knife's blade before it could cut into her. Blood dripped down the jagged metal and steam started coming off her hand in agonizing pain. Ah! Cyrus jumped back and looked down to see the cut along her palm was burning and steaming even after she had let go. Her eyes widened and she struggled through the pain to gasp, "This is holy water." Naruto smirked and twirled his knife around before holding it out confidently. "I found that this stuff is basically like poison to us, right? So I thought it would be a good idea to sterilize my knife in it and see what happens. Looks like it worked." Cyrus moaned in pain before she ripped the string off her neck and opened the vial at the end of it. She dripped its contents over her hand and the wound started to glow before immediately sealing itself. Naruto looked at the phenomenon in surprise as Cyrus stood back up, Phoenix Tears. Gifts provided by Riser-sama to everyone in his peerage. They're capable of healing any injury we might sustain in battle, so even your knife won't be able to damage us for very long. This new devil had taken a bottle of holy water and sterilized a normal knife in it for an advantage against another group of devils. Despite Rias Gremory's peerage not having sufficient experience in a raiding game, this man did not seem to have the same sense of anxiousness as other beginners. Even though he was still located on the Gremory side of the battlefield and not being able to activate promotion, his abilities were substantially higher than a normal pawn's base power. His strength and speed were only slightly lower than a rook and knight at their furthest output. This anomaly. Cyrus spoke with a tone of regret in her voice. "I'm starting to believe that Riser-sama made a mistake allowing you to participate in this match." Naruto was silent for a moment before a small smile came over his face. He nodded. Yes, he did. Naruto immediately ran towards the edge of the roof and jumped off the side before falling down to the street below. Cyrus looked over the edge in surprise as she saw his wings form out of his back and slow his descent before he landed and rolled against the concrete. The knight followed his move and jumped over the side to chase after him as he ran back into the office building. Cyrus ran in and saw that the entire office was in even worse condition than when she left it. There were small craters, cracks, and holes in the walls of the first floor after all the severe fighting happened between the groups. But there was no sign of any of her comrades or enemies on the floor. She looked around and stepped forward hesitantly while trying to keep an open eye to her surroundings. Crash! The ceiling behind her cracked and fell apart as two figures came falling down through the hole. Naruto and Koneko landed in three-point stances before Naruto jumped up and spun in the air. Koneko held out her hand and he grabbed it before making a full rotation and tossing the short white-haired girl at their enemy with full force. Raw. Koneko flew forward and kicked the cracked surface of Cyrus' Zweihander, causing the blade to break in half and planting her foot deeply into the knight's exposed stomach. The Phoenix member was sent flying across the floor and through a wall before she rolled along the ground and struggled to pull herself back up. A blur of yellow and white appeared besides her with a water hose before they pulled her back and tied her up with the rest of her defeated comrades. The duo made a few quick adjustments to the tie and were finished with their capture. Naruto wiped his face and sighed before looking down at his junior. He asked, "Did you have a hard time holding them off?" There were scuff and dirt marks all over Kaneko's uniform with some of her clothes shredded away by some very swift strikes. She had a small bruise on one cheek and a slightly cut lip. But she just shrugged and monotoned, "Not too bad, nothing I couldn't handle." "You'll never win against Riser-sama," one of the girls said as the others nodded and resounded in agreement. They continued, "He isn't going to forfeit the match just because you hold us hostage. He won't give up until he has earned Rias-sama's love and affection." "Yeah, we already figured that out," Naruto said nonchalantly as Koneko walked through the hole and out of sight. He continued, "We already guessed that we weren't gonna win against that guy unless we beat him, so we weren't even gonna try to negotiate with him." The girls of the Phoenix peerage looked between each other in confusion before looking up at their captor. Then why did you tie us up?" "Because it's easier to deal with all of you at the same time rather than chase you everywhere." Naruto threw a look back at the hole they created. "Did you guys know that this entire building is supported by a group of pillars going from the roof down to this level? And all but one of them was destroyed in the fighting you guys had while Koneko held you off." Smash! And that was her breaking the last one. The ceiling and building over them started to shake and quiver as its support beams had fallen. Naruto jumped through the hole and ran towards the door as Koneko held it open from the other side. The girls of the Phoenix peerage looked up at the building shaking over their heads and paled. "Oh no." Naruto and Koneko ran down the street and watched from a safe distance as the building collapsed into rubble with a wave of dust and smoke spreading out everywhere. They stood there silently and watched before another chime rang over the area. Combatant Riser Phoenix's 3 pawns retired. Combatant Riser Phoenix's rook retired. Combatant Riser Phoenix's knight retired. After the report had finished, Naruto and Koneko looked towards each other silently. Naruto had a small smile and raised his fist out towards her. "We did it." Koneko looked at his fist for a moment before answering him with a fist bump. "Kick ass." He chuckled a little before stepping back down the street and looking at the destroyed building. He exhaled. "I guess we need to give Rias some credit. That was a pretty good idea to lure them into the building like that." "Bucho is Bucho," Koneko stated like it was a wide-known fact. "It's best never to underestimate what she can think up. And you're sure we didn't just kill them by dropping a building on their head, right? It's how the game works." Koneko reassured him. "When someone is too injured to continue, they are teleported out of the fight and taken into a healing station outside of the battlefield. You still lose though." Naruto reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out 3 necklaces with an extravagant vial at the end of them. He twirled them around aimlessly. "I took these off a few of the girls after you tied them up. That swordsman said that these have a tear or something in them that is supposed to heal injuries. Sounded useful to have. Phoenix tears. Very useful. Good idea." Koneko looked at the blonde for a moment before she started circling around him with a focused gaze. Naruto saw her inspection and let her silently look over him. He inquired, what are you doing? You're stronger. And faster. She looked up at him with her stoic expression still staying strong and asked, how did you do that without training with us? Naruto looked over himself for a moment before shrugging his shoulders, don't know. A few days ago I started running one night to start some training but I suddenly started moving faster than I usually do. After that I noticed everything was changing. I was getting stronger. My stamina was better. It was, kinda like it used to be. He looked down at his hands with a far-off expression before he came back to himself and reassured the younger girl, you shouldn't have to worry about me anymore. I can hold my own against any of these guys now. Koneko looked up at him and nodded, good. She then seemed to meekly pull her face away from his sight and muttered, I don't want to worry about you getting hurt. Huh. Naruto leaned down to hear the shorter girl better, what did you say? Koneko regained her stoic facade, nothing. Combatant riser Phoenix's 3 pawns retired. Naruto looked back up and around at the city, looks like the others are holding their own pretty well. We should still go help them. Koneko said firmly before she started walking down the street towards the center of the city, I'm still worried about Yudo-senpai and Issei-senpai. Yeah. You always gotta worry about that pervert screwing up, don't you? Koneko deadpanned, coming from the guy who died trying to save his life. Okay, point taken. Naruto started following after Koneko before the distance became too big, so when we get there who are we? BOOOOOOOOM. Koneko was covered by a massive explosion that blew Naruto off his feet and into a car hard enough to dent its doors. He fell to his knee and groaned in pain as he looked up to see the street had been cracked and warped by the power of the explosion. His eyes widened and he stumbled up on his feet before running, Koneko. Naruto ran through the smoke and down the crater as he waved his hand in front of him to pass the smoke. He reached the center and saw the younger freshman was lying in the center of the blast crater. Her clothes were almost all completely blown away and she had burns and injuries all over her body. Naruto panicked and fell to his knees as he gingerly ran his arms under her back and shoulder to lift her up. He carefully placed her against his chest and tapped her cheek, Koneko. Koneko, stay with me. Keep your eyes open, come on. Stay with me. Kaneko's eyes barely moved a fraction before they slowly opened up to look at the blonde holding onto her. Her eyes hadn't registered the terrible pain she was in yet but her voice weakly trembled, senpai. Naruto nervously smiled and nodded his head, yeah Koneko, I'm right here. It's okay, you'll be fine, I promise. Just keep those eyes open, okay. Koneko could barely keep her eyes half-lidded as her voice barely carried, I'm sorry. I let my guard down an. Shut up. Don't talk. Just save your energy for now. Naruto pulled his jacket off and draped it over her almost naked form as he picked her up in a bridal carry, I won't let anything else happen to you. That's quite a noble promise to make, but not one you should be putting faith in. Naruto stopped and looked up to see a woman with purple hair and wearing a dress that revealed most of her large chest flying over them with her wings spread out. She mused, I'll commend you for being able to defeat Cyrus and the others so quickly, but I promise you I will not be so easy to beat. Naruto looked back down at the injured girl he was carrying before asking, are you the one that did this to her? Yes, that's right. She had a small smile on her face at the superior position she had at the moment. I am Yubeluna, Riser-sama's queen but I also go by the moniker, Bomb Queen. A pleasure to meet you. Instead of a pleasant reply, Naruto looked up at her with venom in his eyes. He spoke with sheer anger in his voice, you bitch. There's no reason to be so spiteful, I was not trying to make that girl's injuries as agonizing as they appear. In fact I was attempting to expel her from the game in one hit, but she is far more durable than I first believed. But do not worry. She held her hand out and a small ball of explosive power started to form in her palm. This next hit will be powerful enough to remove you both from the ga. A massive bolt of electricity came falling from the sky and struck Yubeluna in the middle of her sentence. The Phoenix Queen let out a cry of pain as she felt the sensation of thousands of needles pierce her skin in an instant. She was blasted into the street below and barreled through the concrete before finally stopping. Naruto didn't react as he saw a figure slowly descend in front of him after attacking the bomb queen. Akino was wearing a strange priestess outfit with her devil wings behind her before they retracted back in. She turned back to look at Naruto and they stared silently before she asked with honest concern, "Are you okay?" He nodded, "I'm fine, but Kaneko's hurt bad." Akino turned around and looked over her precious junior with a pained expression. She shook her head, "I can't heal her here. I don't think she'll be able to fight for the rest of the match." "Yes, she can. I stole some of those Phoenix Terror things from their group. I just need to give it to her and she should be fine." They heard a rumbling and looked back to see Yubeluna pull herself out of the trench she had been thrown into. Akino turned to face her and spoke over her shoulder, "You need to get out of here and go help Yuto-kun and Issei-kun. I'll handle her." Before Akino could step away, she felt something tug on her sleeve. She looked back to see Koneko barely staying conscious before she moaned out, Akino-senpai." The ponytailed woman gave a comforting smile and held the white-haired girl's hand reassuringly. Naruto asked, "You'll be all right, right?" "I'll be fine." "Kick her ass, got it?" Akino turned around and started gather lighting around her hand, "You didn't even have to say it." Naruto sprinted down the street and out of sight as the two queens slowly approached each other. Yubeluna smiled and started causing her explosion to gather around her hand. "I've always wanted to meet the famous Priestess of Thunder in the flesh." Akino gave a small smirk and laughed, Era, and I've always wanted to fight the Bomb Queen in person. Please." Her eyes gave a serious focus, "Go easy on me. Devil." Riser was leaning against a car on the edge of the city limits and the end of the battlefield area. He had a stern expression over his usually carefree, confident face as he looked out at the pillar of smoke rising from the other side of the city. He was honestly very disappointed at the moment with the state of this fight. So far he had lost 9 members of his peerage and the rest were currently fighting against other members of Rias group. Usually, this would be the part where the king would feel discouraged and anxious about the rest of the fight. But Riser was not concerned about the outcome of the raiding game. He had more experience. He had won every game he had fought in and he only lost because his older brother asked him to forfeit the matches. He was a proud member of the Phoenix family. The immortal family. He could not lose. Not even to a member of the Gremory. A wave of black and red energy shot out from the side and reduced the car he was sitting on and his entire right arm into nothingness. Riser stumbled back and looked at his missing limb as the stump already started to get covered in fire and reform from flames. As his arm regenerated, a cocky smirk came over his face. "You know, it's rather reckless to be taking the king vs king route. Especially considering you aren't so much of a fighter type." Standing further down the street from him with her trademark destruction emanating from her hands and a stern scowl on her face. She had taken the chance her servants were making while fighting the rest of his peerage to come and attack him. Asia was hiding behind a car as she looked at her master in worry, Bucho-san. "Don't come out here, Asia." Riza stopped the innocent blonde nun from stepping out of her hiding spot. Ria's sea foam eyes revealed a strong and unyielding strength behind them that was not willing to fall to the man before her. She concentrated her destruction over her hands and threatened, "I'm not going to lose to you, Riser." "Of course you aren't." A torrent of violent fire and wind started pouring off the handsome man. "You're going to realize that I'm the best choice you could have ever made." "Devil." "Oh shit." Issei screamed in a panicked voice as he ran as fast as he could to save his life. "Where ya goin'? Don't just leave us. We wanted to talk. And play. And slice. And dice. And carve. And grind." Two adorable little twins with neon green hair chased after the pervert while waving chainsaws around haphazardly. "We just wanna disembowel you and cut off your junk, X2. Don't say creepy shit like that with such kind, innocent voices, you monsters." Standing off to the side and watching the fighting occur just a few meters from her was a blonde girl with her hair in a drill style. She was wearing a formal pink dress that showed her status as a member of a high-class family. She was standing off to the side and watched the fighting between her brothers Peerage and Rias. "Is something bothering you, Revel-sama?" Revel looked up at the taller woman dressed in a leather outfit and with a mask covering one side of her face. She answered that no, Isabella-san, I'm fine. Really? Because you seem worried. Revel looked down with a guilty expression before turning to the taller woman. Rias-sama's peerage is stronger than we believed. Yes, you are right. They certainly are. Isabella looked towards a smoking crater that was created just moments ago when the brown-haired boy gathered up his power and shot a massive beam of demonic power at 3 of their pawns. There was also the fact that over half of their fighting force was beaten on the other side of the city. Revel watched as the Gremory Knight blocked and countered Carlomene's attacks superbly while the pawn evaded Il and Nell's chainsaws. She spoke with concern. I am worried because we may not win this fight if we don't take it seriously. There's nothing to fear, Revel-sama. The rest of us will do everything in our power to make up for the losses we have garnered thus far. And even if we may fall, there is still Yubeluna and Riser-sama to hold the game together. They will not lose no matter what, so please don't fret. I suppose you are right. Revel faced back towards the fighting and tried to calm herself down. I trust that all of you can. Isabella jerked down and grabbed Revel around the chest before she jumped up and over a car thrown in their direction. They landed back on the street and the others looked in the direction of the destroyed vehicle. Revel had a panicked expression. What was that? Isabella placed the Phoenix girl back on her feet and looked down the street. We have company. From the direction of the thrown car was one tall blonde wearing an orange shirt and a short white-haired girl wearing a larger black jacket to cover herself. The blonde smiled. Sorry we're late. Issei smiled. Naruto-senpai. Koneko-chan. Thank goodness you're Stop it you little bitches. Yuto crossed swords with the Phoenix Knight, and gave a strained smile. Glad to see you both made it out okay. That shouldn't be possible. Carlomene narrowed her eyes and kept her blade against her blonde opponent's sword. She shouted in disbelief. Yubeluna should have beaten anyone that had defeated a single member of us. How are you both still active in the game? Koneko gave a small look of displeasure, because I'm tougher than I look. Still hurt though. She pulled on the collar of the black school jacket she received from her senior. Naruto-senpai was nice enough to let me borrow his jacket. The rest of my clothes were destroyed by the blast. Issei stopped running and the twins stopped chasing him in surprise. His shoulders and voice were shaking. Koneko-chan isn't wearing anything underneath that jacket. And she's wearing Naruto-senpai's jacket over herself. He had tears streaming down his eyes and he pointed at the whiskered man in anger. You lucky bastard. Why? Why do you get in all these lucky situations? First Akano-san's bra, now Koneko-chan naked. I wanna be in those situations rather than you. Naruto glared and deadpanned at him. You understand it wasn't a very favorable place for either of them, right? Doesn't matter. Still wanna. Isabella asked, and how did you recover? That would be thanks to the rest of your team. Naruto asserted as he pulled out an empty vial of phoenix tears he used on Koneko, and the little gifts they gave us before leaving. Hey! Revel pointed at the vial in livid anger at the theft of their precious gifts. Those were gifts given to the members of our peerage by the higher-ups of the Phoenix clan. I must ask that you hand those back to us immediately. Naruto looked at the vial in his hand before putting it back in his pocket. No. How rude. Revel shrieked in surprise. Isabella didn't wait another moment to attack before she dashed forward and slammed her elbow into the blonde's guarding arm. He dropped the knife in his guarding hand before he grabbed it with his other and attempted to slash the masked woman's face before she grabbed his wrist. She shook her head. You are not going to get me that easily. How about this? Naruto lurched backwards and pulled her off her feet before rolling back and kicking her over himself. She cartwheeled and flipped once before landing back on her feet and into a stance. He placed his hands by his head and flipped back to his feet before jumping back at the masked woman and swiping at her body. She blocked his arms with her guard as he aimed up and down to stab her. He then folded in and stuck his elbow between her guard and pulled it away before landing a hook across her face but to no serious avail. He followed through with a jumping spin kick and knocked her back on her ass before she immediately spun on the ground back to her feet. Revel wanted to come to her assistance but stumbled and fell on her butt as Koneko came sliding in and nearly breaking her with a dropkick. The white-haired girl jumped back to her feet and dashed forward as Revel clumsily and barely dodged Kaneko's moderate strikes. The freshman skipped forward and prepared an axe kick to hit the other girl's collarbone but Revel grew a pair of flaming wings on her back and flew up. Koneko looked up at the girl that was panting in worry and spoke quietly, "Fire bird." Rebel took a moment to compose herself before trying to speak back with honor, That's right. I am Rebel Phoenix. Proud daughter of the Phoenix clan and holder of the title of Immortal Bird. Koneko deadpanned, "Fried chicken." A vein pulsed on Rebel's head as she shrieked, How insolent. You rude girl. Yuto crossed blades with Carlamine with their swords blurring into shimmering lights and crossing with enough force to spread sparks in every direction. The armor-clad woman lunged forward and thrust her blade forward at the young man as that knight pulled out another sword from his sword berth. Yuto continued to parry and block the strikes aimed at his chest by the female knight. The two swordsmen crossed blades and struggled to push against the scrapping of metal before Carlamine gave a confident smile and chuckled, I was correct. You most certainly are a wonderful knight with excellent swordsmanship. Yuto gave a small smile in return, thank you. But I still have a lot to offer. Good. Because I do as well. The two pawns continued to chase Issei around the street and try to carve into him like a Christmas turkey but could not reach him in time. Issei kept sprinting to save his life until boost. Haha. That's it. Issei jumped and skid against the street before he looked up at his pursuers and smirked. He let his crooked bat-like wings spread out from his back and he spoke confidently, this fight is over. The twins looked at each other in confusion before looking back at him and tilting their heads, what are you talking about? We haven't even cut into you yet. Doesn't matter. My power has finally started building up and now I have a chance to use it. He held up his red gauntlet and let the jewel shine with a big smile, my ultimate technique. What are you talking about? There's no way you can end a fight with one technique. Yes I can. Issei held out both his hands and spoke confidently, the moment I touch you, your part in this fight is over. Enough talk. They ran forward. Time to cut you up. They raised their chainsaws and brought it down on the pawn. But Issei bent down and ran past them as his hands ran over their stomachs. For just a moment, a magic circle appeared over where he touched them until it faded away again. The twins landed and looked over themselves before they questioned, what happened? What did you do? Like I said. Issei turned around and raised his hands with a lecherous smirk, this fight is over. Dress tilde. Break. Snap snap. SCHRIP. Across the entire street, all of the fighting halted as the sound of shredding clothes reached their ears. They looked in the same direction to see the twins were now stark naked. Their shirts, their shorts, even their shoes, socks, and panties had been ripped to small bits of fabric. X2. The twins fell to their knees and covered their privates in an attempt to keep their dignity intact. Issei pumped his fist and cheered, I did it. I finally did it. Righteous man tears started streaming down his face at finally being able to use his new technique in battle. He wiped his eyes and roared happily, my ultimate special. The one Asia had to suffer for in the dead of night every day for the last week. The one so effective that it makes up for my lack of demonic power with result. It rips, tears, and shreds all clothing worn by women until they are in nothing but their birthday suit. My dress break. Everyone in the immediate vicinity, Gremory and Phoenix, and everyone watching through the screens just stared at the strange pervert after he had stripped to girls with just a touch of his hands. The people around him in particular had their jaws agape. Pervert. You lecherous fiend. How vulgar. Truly the attack of a deviant. Why in the world would Rias-sama take in a degenerate like this? Issei-kun, we're in the middle of a fight, you realize that, right? Geez fuck face, can't you take this seriously at all? You need to go dig yourself under a rock in the deepest trench on earth in the blackest pit away from all forms of light and civilization. Issei lowered his head in shame after being reprimanded by both allies and enemies. Boost. The jewel on his gauntlet shined once more and he perked up again. He smiled, all right. Kiba. We're ready. Got it. Yuto jumped back and stood tall before yelling, do it Issei-kun. The others watched in slight anxiousness and fear as Issei came running and prepared to touch the handsome boy. And after they just watched him tear the clothes off of two other girls by touching them, they were apprehensive to see where this led. Transfer. Issei transferred his power into Yuto and the blonde boy's power exploded. Yuto held his hand up and sent a quick glance to Naruto and Koneko to tell them to run. He slammed his hand into the ground and yelled, "Sword birth!" Blades started popping up like weeds all across the street as Issei, Koneko, and Naruto jumped up a truck to safety. The Phoenix girls didn't have the same time to react as the blades pierced through their legs and chests in surprise. They let out a last groan of pain before they glowed brightly and disappeared. Combatant Riser Phoenix's 2 pawns retired. Combatant Riser Phoenix's knight retired. Combatant Riser Phoenix's rook retired. Woohoo! We did it! Issei cheered as he climbed down the truck and jumped in joy. He grinned at the rest of his group. We were awesome, right guys? They were all still giving him a dry glare after they had seen his ridiculous technique. Yuto shook his head. Issei-kun, maybe you should think about locking that technique away for a while. No way. Issei argued and pumped his fist. I worked hard to complete this special technique. Asia had to suffer days of humiliation to help me perfect this. Naruto raised an eyebrow. What the hell did you do to Asia, you creep? Koneko tapped their sides and pointed up at the flying Phoenix girl that had a worried look on her face after the rest of her peerage had been defeated. The Gremory group looked towards the flying girl and Yuto asked, what shall we do about her? Koneko monotoned, I still wanna beat her. Issei started doing creepy gestures with his hands, I still need to wring out some problems with my technique. Rebel flinched in fear at the idea. It doesn't matter. Naruto started walking down the street away from their previous battlefield. We have one more target left to fight before the fight is over. He was right. Their last target was Riser. And after they finished him off, the match was theirs. Rias should already be fighting him, so if they all. Boom. A blast occurred over their heads and an object came falling down and cratered the street behind them. They all looked back in shock as the dust and smoke settled and the form of Akino with her clothes blown off and her body covered in injuries was in the center of the crater. She coughed up some blood and started gasping for air. Akino-san. No. Koneko ran up to her side and gently lifted her shoulders. Akino-senpai. Wake up. The boys looked up in shock to see Yubeluna was flying over them with a smile on her face. An empty vial of phoenix tears hanging around her neck as her clothes were in tatters after fighting Akino for so long. Koneko looked back and held out a hand. Naruto-senpai, give me a vial. Naruto nodded and reached into his pocket before pulling out a vial. He threw it to her. Boom. Another massive explosion enveloped Akino, Koneko, and everything in the area with fire and smoke. The men looked at the explosion in shock as they heard another chime carry over the area. Combatant Rias Gremory's queen retired. Combatant Rias Gremory's rook retired. Yubeluna lowered her hand after landing the finishing blow and smiled. Those are special gifts for our peerage. We don't appreciate you stealing them from us. She looked towards Rebel and spoke with a sweet tone. Rebel-sama, please find a place to hide. Oh, of course. Rebel was hesitant before she flew away to safety from the fighting about to occur. The men of the Gremory group were standing there in silence as they stared at the spot their comrades were just a moment ago before they were blown up. They looked up to see Yubeluna smirk down at them before speaking out in a breathy voice, so, are you little boys still going to try and win? Issei stared at the powerful queen, flying over them with pure anger filling up inside him. He gripped his fists and gritted his teeth in rage as Yuto roared as several swords popped up around him and he pulled 2 of them out of the concrete. He yelled and jumped as his wings popped up and he flew at the woman in rage, you witch. Boom. Another massive explosion was blown out of Yubeluna's hand and exploded against Yuto. The young man was covered in smoke and fire as his eyes rolled into the back of his head. He started falling towards the ground as his body glowed bright and he disappeared. Combatant Rias Gremory's knight retired. Issei and Naruto were left standing in the street as Yubeluna looked down at them with a maniacal gaze. She smiled and raised her hand again. Run. Issei came back to his senses. Wa. Naruto yelled, run Issei. The 2 pawns spared no more time and sprinted down the street as Yubeluna covered the ground with explosions. They rounded the corner at unnatural speeds as Yubeluna gave chase and littered the space behind them with blasts. Issei had activated his promotion to achieve his speed while Naruto was relying on his own speed to keep him from damage. The Phoenix Queen swung her arms back and forth as the ground exploded and smoke filled the streets and buildings. Shops and cars exploded in massive balls of fire as the two pawns ran as fast as they could from the explosive mistress. Ubeluna decided to stop playing around and waved her arms as wide as possible. Dozens and dozens of small fireballs formed across the street as stagnant explosions. Only a single instant away from activating and covering the entire block in a ball of fire. Issei watched it all happen in slow motion. There were several balls of fire formed around him that he could not escape from. There was one explosion about to hit Naruto in the back. Out of the two of them, only one could escape with minimal damage. Issei pushed as much power as he could into his legs. He dove forward with his arms outstretched and pushed Naruto forward from the blast field. Naruto gave one quick look back in surprise as Issei steeled his eyes and gave a small nod. BOOM. The entire city block was covered in fire and smoke as an explosion rocked the area. The blast carried on and smoke filled the streets and lingered for a long time. Ubeluna floated over the destroyed street and the shattered windows of the remaining shops and buildings. She hovered in silence for a moment before a chime rang through the area. Combatant Rias Gremory's pawn retired. Only one. Then again, she remembered the controversy surrounding the whiskered blonde and how he was an illegal piece. She supposed that since he wasn't originally allowed to participate in the raiding game, there was a chance he would not be rescued before his injuries were too severe. If he was dead, then Rias Gremory was not going to appreciate that. Oh well. That would just be a small issue they had to deal with before moving on with their lives. Ubeluna flapped her wings and started heading towards Riser's location to support her king. After Ubeluna flew away, the smoke and dust started to settle over the city block. On the edge of the blast radius was one store shop with its front windows shattered and all of its mannequins toppled over. Some of the mannequins started to shuffle and Naruto slowly lifted himself out of the pile on his hands and knees. He was panting and trying to regain his bearings after the explosion had blown out one of his eardrums. He slowly started to lift himself up. Ah! Naruto fell again when he felt a sharp pain run over his abdomen. He looked down to see a rather large shard of glass stained red sticking out of his abdomen. He narrowed his eyes and grabbed the shard before pulling it out and seeing his vision go white for a moment. Naruto took a deep breath and ignored the pain settled in his stomach before he tossed the shard away and lifted himself up to his feet. He wiped the blood off his face and out of his eyes as he looked in the direction he could feel energy surge. Riser was in that direction. And so was Rias. Devil. They were gone. They were all gone now. Her peerage. The people she cherished as family. Her friends and adorable servants. They were all gone from her side now. They weren't dead, she knew that. She knew that they were being healed at this very moment and they would be fine when she saw them again. So why did she feel so empty? Why did she feel like they were gone from her side forever? Rias tried to keep her composure and steady her breath as she faced her enemy. She felt her stamina wane and her injuries build up along with the damage to her clothes, revealing the bottom of her breasts and most of her stomach and arms. She wasn't able to receive Asia's healing because Riser had become aware of her ability and started attacking the nun whenever she revealed herself. So Asia had to hide behind a van while Rias blocked his fire attacks with her destruction ability. An arrow of fire flew towards her and she struck it away with her power to protect herself. On the other side of the street, Riser still had his hand outstretched with a confident smirk on his face. He chided, "What's wrong, Rias? Seems like you're on edge. Scared now that the rest of your peerage has been wiped out." Rias narrowed her eyes, "Shut up. It's nothing to feel nervous about. It was quite unnerving the first time one of my peerage was retired from the game as well. I'm sure you are handling it no better." Rias waved her hand and sent a wave of destruction towards him, "Shut up." Before her attack could reach him, Ubeluna came flying in and blocked the worst of Rias' attack with her defense. She immediately countered and forced Rias to dive behind cover as a stream of explosions littered the street. Rias moaned in pain and had to lift herself back up before peeking around the corner of the wall she dove behind to see her enemies converse. Riser looked back at his queen, so how was it dealing with the rest of them? Yubeluna bowed her head to her master. No troubles, Riser-sama. The priestess of thunder was more difficult to handle than I originally believed, but once I used the tear you gave me, there was no trouble in defeating an exhausted woman. After that, the rest of her peerage followed. She raised her head again. That one pawn with whiskers was among the last I defeated. Since he was an illegal piece, I'm not sure if he was transported away or if the damage he sustained was too severe. Riser scratched his head. Well, she won't like that. He covered his mouth and yelled down the street, Rias. I think I owe you a pawn. Rias gripped her fist tightly and gnashed her teeth. That couldn't be true. Issei-san, everybody, it's not possible. Rias looked across the street to see Asia hiding behind a car and leaning against it with wide, horrified eyes. Her eyes started to quiver and water as she gripped against the car. How could they hurt Issei-san like that? Why would they hurt them like that? It's so cruel. Asia, it's okay. Rias tried to calm the panicking nun from her cover across the burning street. Issei's okay. All of them are still okay. Just breathe and calm down. Riser casually stepped forward before covering. Rias. You have no more warriors. No more people to fight for you. It's time to give up. Rias scowled and glared from around the corner as she considered her options and what she could do now. But she saw something move in the corner of her eye and Asia ran out of her cover into the street. Asia. Asia, no. Please stop. Asia yelled to Riser and his queen, as she shook but swallowed her fear and faced their enemy. She yelled with desperation, just please stop this. There's been enough fighting. Your friends have been hurt. And so have ours. Tears started forming in the corners of her eyes and she stifled a sob before continuing. Why do we have to keep hurting each other for this fight? Why do we have to keep fighting? Rias looked at Asia's back as Riser just stared at the girl silently. Yubeluna prepared to attack the nun but Riser raised his hand and stopped her from attacking before he spoke, because this is what we have to do. A reincarnated devil like you will never understand how important it is that people like Rias and I are married together. We have suffered through centuries of fighting and we will suffer through centuries more. And I will not have something I was promised taken away from me. I will beat and destroy anyone and anything in my way until I have what I want. Riser scowled and glared at the terrified nun. Your tears and cries won't be able to stop me. So don't even try. Asia looked at Riser in stunned shock as she realized that she would not be able to convince him to stop fighting. She lowered her head as Riser started gather flames around his hand. He held his hand out to her and her voice carried out over the crackling flames. Someone like you doesn't deserve Bucho-san. A column of fire came towards her and covered everything around her in flames. Combatant Rias Gremory's bishop retired. Riser lowered his hand as the flames disappeared and the blonde nun's figure was nowhere to be seen. He smiled and shook his head. You retired her before she was even hit by the flames. Geez Rias, you are such a bleeding heart. It's compassion like that that has so many people worried about your future. He stepped forward and announced, so what are you going to do now Rias? You have no one left to fight for you and you won't be able to beat the both of us by yourself. I'm sure Sears-sama and the rest of your family would not be happy if I actually hurt you to finish this match. So are you going to surrender, or are we finishing this the hard way? Yubeluna looked at Riser's back. I believe she has chosen the hard way, Riser-sama. Yes, I suppose you are right. He gathered his flames around his arms and smirked. Well, maybe I'll be able to teach her just how capable I am to protect. A car door came flying from behind them and sliced through half of Riser's head as the Phoenix boy stumbled. Yubeluna looked back in shock as a foot landed against her guard and pushed her into the ground before he kept running. Rias looked around the corner before a rough, callous hand grabbed her hand and pulled her along. Naruto yelled, run. Naruto led Rias around the corner as Riser's head started to regenerate. As he regained his sight and voice, he yelled, I thought you took care of him. After them. Naruto and Rias kept running down the street and away from their enemies. Rias looked up at the blonde's back as he led them to a safe spot and stuttered, and Naruto. What are you? Come on. In here. Naruto pushed the door open to a furniture shop and led her to the back before they hid behind a large bed. Rias was panting after the sudden run before she looked at the man sitting beside her. She looked over him to see his clothes were tattered and burnt, his skin was bloody and cut, and there was a spot in his abdominal that was severely bleeding. She crawled over to him and started to try and help. You're hurt. Let me help. Naruto closed his eyes and tried to catch his breath as he opened one eye and watched the beauty besides him treat his wound. He took a deep breath, ignored the stinging pain under his ribs, and asked, what happened to Asia? Rias continued to look over the puncture wound. She tried to convince Riser to stop all this fighting and he attacked her. I pulled her out of the game before she got hit. He nodded his head. Good choice. If she's fine then maybe she can go and heal the others faster. I need to surrender. Naruto's eyes widened and he looked at the crimson-haired girl besides him. What? I'm going to surrender. She repeated herself as she tore a portion of her clothes off and wrapped them around his injured area. We can't keep fighting. And I can't beat Riser by myself. She shook her head. This fight is over. Naruto grabbed her hand and argued, so. I can keep fighting Rias. I don't know how well this might work but. Everyone else gave themselves up for me. We're alone in this fight. She looked up at him with watery eyes. And I don't know whether you'll be evacuated if you are hurt too badly. Her voice started to shake and she leaned her head into his chest. I don't want anyone else to be hurt. Naruto sat there quietly as Rias leaned further into him and tried to keep herself composed in the tension of the battle. She closed her eyes for a moment and shook her head before inquiring, is this what you meant about how horrible it would be to fight in a war? Losing people you cherish. Because I don't think I can handle it. Naruto pulled her close and covered her in a hug as a large explosion blew out a portion of the store. Rias yelped in shock and clung to Naruto desperately as Riser's and Ubeluna's fire and explosions started blowing up the entire store in an attempt to scare them out. As the explosions covered everything around them, Rias could only hear one thing speak in a calm and reassuring tone to her ear. You're an idiot. You know that, right? Rias' eyes widened as Naruto's voice whispered in her ear as they started getting pelted by fire. You can't understand why Koneko, Akeno, Kiba, Issei, and Asia would fight for you. You don't know why they would fight tooth and nail until they were hurt so badly for you. But isn't it obvious? It's because they cherish you, they treasure you, they love you. Rias, they don't want to give you up because they want you to be happy, because you're the only person who ever gave a damn about the misfits, weirdos, outcasts, and lonely brats that crossed your way. And I understand now too. One more massive explosion occurred around them as Naruto didn't even flinch and gently ran a hand over her head before whispering. Rias, you're someone worth fighting for. Boom. The explosion died out and the entire shop exploded from the force of two blasts. Riser and Ubeluna stood there silently and lowered their hands after the smoke passed out of their sight. They awaited for the chime and the report that said they had won the match. But their eyes widened when they saw an injured, burnt back covering two people from their sight. Rias' eye was opened in shock as she was kept close to Naruto's chest as she heard his steady heartbeat ring in her ear. She suddenly felt an immense sense of relief spread over her body as her wounds disappeared instantly. An empty vial of phoenix tears fell from Naruto's hand as he patted her head and whispered to her. Wait for the perfect moment, then you can finish it. Naruto gave her a pat on the head before he pushed himself up to his feet like his injuries were not even a factor. Riser, Ubeluna, and Rias all looked at the blonde pawn, in shock as he turned around and faced the Phoenix pair. They could see the stern, furious glare focused at them. And the strange orange coloring covering his eyes, with his irises becoming yellow and his pupils becoming horizontal black bars. Riser stared at the strange transformation of the odd blonde man before he scoffed. Did you actually take time to put makeup on in the middle of a raiding game? That's surprising. Naruto didn't react to the laughter being directed at his expense and walked ahead slowly. He looked over his hands quietly as if in disbelief and shook his head. I guess it wasn't just a hallucination. It's really back. He turned to Riser and spoke with a firm tone. This is it. Your last chance. Stop the fighting, or I'll beat you myself. Riser started cackling. Ahahaha. Oh, that's rich. I'm sorry, can you say that Agai? Glargh. Riser's eyes widened as he felt the fist shatter his teeth, break through the back of his throat, and continue all the way until Naruto's entire arm nearly ran through his head. Naruto's strange eyes conveyed mounds of anger and unyielding will. I said, that was your last chance. Naruto pulled his fist out of Riser's wound before lifting his leg until it was perpendicular with the ground. Naruto's eyes steeled and he brought his foot down in an axe kick on Riser's head. The sheer power behind Naruto's kick was so staggering that it crushed Riser's body, completely shattered the street beneath them and shook the buildings around them as a crater formed under his heel. The smoke and dust that blew out beneath them forced Ubeluna to fly away to safety and caused Rias to stumble and fall in the middle of the rubble. Ubeluna flew up high into the air and looked down at the smoke cloud in shock. Just a few moments ago, he and Rias were at their mercy and prepared to be defeated. But now, he was like a monster. Naruto's form appeared from the smoke cloud and his back was facing the bomb queen as he didn't even take a moment to acknowledge her. He slowly turned to look over his shoulder and glare at the flying woman, causing her to flinch and cower under his gaze. He stared at her for a moment before turning around again and yelling, "You're going to pay for blowing all of them up. I hope you know that." Ubeluna shook in fear before she steeled herself and yelled back, If you want to take revenge for your peerage, then I'll be waiting for you to make your move." "I already did." Ubeluna's eyes widened when she felt a presence appear behind her. She looked back to see a copy of the strange-eyed blonde holding a blue ball with a large spinning ring around it. Ubeluna panicked and raised her hands to cause an explosion that impacted against the blue ball. A red explosion was instantly devoured by a white explosion that blew away all the smoke and crumbled the top of the buildings around it. The white explosion continued occurring for several moments as a chime barely registered in their ears. Combatant Riser Phoenix's queen retired. After several more moments, the loud shrieking explosion died down and left the remaining fighters standing in the street in surprise. Naruto nodded his head, "That's one. Why, you bastard." Naruto looked over to see Riser lift himself out of the crater while his body finished rebuilding itself. He struggled to stand up and yelled with anger in his voice, What the hell are you? I'm a mistake you never should have made." Naruto pulled his knife out with one hand and created another ball of blue energy in his other hand without the spinning ring. His hair parted to reveal his eyes once again as he droned, "What's wrong, Riser? Is the great immortal chicken feeling fear?" Riser gritted his teeth as veins started popping up all over his face. He yelled, "Raw HHHHHHHH." Naruto countered the Phoenix's fist with his ball of energy, completely twisting and shattering Riser's arm before it even reached him. He then ducked down and stabbed his poisoned knife into the man's stomach before following through and nearly disemboweling him. Riser screamed in pain before the whiskered blonde spun on his foot and kicked the man in the side, shattering his bones and sending him flying with the force of his kick. Riser was sent flying through several buildings as his broken body started to repair itself. He spread his wings and stopped the force he was sent flying with and tried to prepare an attack. But Naruto appeared in front of him in a burst of speed and slammed his knife down into the other blonde's head, causing Riser to scream in terrible agony. Naruto landed on his feet as Riser was screaming with the knife lodged in his skull. He popped back up and struck the Phoenix across the face, nearly obliterating his entire face as the sight of shattered bone and torn flesh could be spotted for a moment before being engulfed in flames. Naruto continued with a barrage of fists that broke and shattered Riser's body, shredding his skin and causing his flames to reform them. Riser's senses were dulled from the immense and continuous pain he was suffering while not even being able to block. Naruto grabbed his knife and pulled it out before slashing Riser's throat, causing it to burst out in blood and smoke from the essence of holy water still lingering in his blade. Naruto landed a punch in Riser's belly that nearly popped out the other side before he was blasted through another building and sent flying into the sky. Riser was panting furiously as he tried to catch his breath out of the blonde monster's reach. Rasenshuriken. Another ball surrounded by spinning blades came flying out of the remains of the destroyed building and sliced Riser in half through the waist before it kept flying and exploded behind him. Riser continued floating in the air with only half of his body as the lower portion started to regenerate through the flames. "You're going to start feeling fear soon, Riser," Naruto said from the ground as he looked up at the immortal fire bird. He continued, "I hope you are ready for it." Riser felt sweat drop down his face before he gritted his teeth and yelled, "Why you are not enough to scary me, you scum. I am Riser Phenex, the immortal fire bird." He gathered up his demonic power as he body shined like a sun in the smoky sky. He raised his hands and gathered his fire into a large ball of flames. Naruto just slowly raised his hand and made another Rasenshuriken in his palm. He bent his knees and prepared to jump as his eyes narrowed at Riser. "Now burn under my flames." Riser threw down his hands and the ball of fire changed into several dozen spears of flame that came falling towards Naruto as he jumped up. Naruto was smothered by the blazing hot flames and Riser let out a breath of relief as his form disappeared in the fire. Until Naruto popped out of the flames and kept soaring upwards, his body partially burnt and injured but still with enough power in him to hold his final attack. He spun in the air and threw his attack at Riser, the Phenex staring at the ball of immense energy flying straight towards him in horror. He twisted and spun in the air until he just barely dodged the attack, letting it pass by him by just a few millimeters. The color around Naruto's eyes faded away and his eyes turned back to blue. He spat out, 3. The Rasenshuriken exploded dozens of meters away from them and whipped the wind and their hair around wildly. Riser felt a great sense of relief wash over him after dodging the final attack and securing his victory. Ah! Naruto tackled into him after spreading his wings and stabbed his knife into the back of Riser's neck, halting his regeneration and movement long enough for them to fall towards the ground. Riser spat up globs of blood but continued to keep his confident smirk. "This is it, you scum. Your attacks are through. You lose." His eyes widened madly and he screamed manically, "I'm not afraid of you." They kept falling towards the street but Naruto smirked, "You're wrong, Riser. I'm not the one you're supposed to be afraid of." Naruto pulled the blade out and jumped off Riser's falling body before stopping his descent with his devil wings. Riser landed and bounced off the ground with a gasp of pain before he felt his body start to regenerate. But his eyes widened when he spotted the figure standing across the street. Rias' eyes were calm yet furious. She stood tall with her hand outstretched and destruction surrounding her palm. She narrowed her eyes before sending a massive surge of destruction down the street, annihilating the remains of the street and engulfing Riser as he screamed. No. His voice was finally silenced as the destruction power waned and disappeared. After a moment, Rias' ears perked when she heard the final report. Combatant Riser Phenex has retired. The victor is Rias Gremory. Rias let out a sigh of relief as she fell to her knees after losing the last of the strength in her legs. In the middle of the once beautiful city that was now reduced to rubble and debris, Rias Gremory rested in the street after landing the finishing blow against her enemy. Gah! There was a loud thud and Rias looked over to see Naruto had landed on his back after using up the last of his strength. His face and body were covered in sweat and he was panting after exhausting the last of his power in the fight against the Phenex family. He opened up one eye and looked over at Rias before a small, lopsided smile came over his head. So, how does it feel to win your first match?